I have 1:02 on my clock if everyone is back. And I did make some changes to my audio, so hopefully people can hear me a little bit better.
Sound way better, Mark, right now.
What was that?
I said you sound much better right now.
Okay, good. I normally have a scratchy voice, as you know, because I'm hypothyroid, but hopefully you can hear that scratchy voice better. So we are now on agenda item number 8. Update on possible action on proposed legislation and regulatory amendments regarding the elimination of the California board examination. And I thought it was hard enough to add regulation or legislation, but who knew it was going to be so difficult to remove some. But we had a subcommittee appointed at the last board meeting. And I will turn this discussion over to Jessica to go over the memo.
Okay, so members, you have quite a bit of information in front of you. And so what I'm going to do to help the conversation is share my screen so you know where you can follow along in the process. So just a quick background, as you all know, you guys voted to eliminate the CSBE as a requirement for licensure after hearing the presentation from OPES with the opinion that it was redundant from the national exam. So with that, though, there's quite a few statutes and regulations that were impacted by eliminating the CSBE. And we knew that we wanted to make sure that we did it correctly, but we also needed to do it quickly. And so what we did is have Dr. Bradbury and Dr. Noland as board members. They participated in meetings with me. We also had Dr. Miller and Dan Baxter from CVMA participate as well. I want to give just a quick thing.
Alana needs to be let back in. She said she's needs to be promoted. She got kicked out. Sorry.
Moderator, are you able to promote Alana?
This is the moderator. I do not see Alana in the attendee list as of yet.
Okay.
Alana Yanez, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Not in the list.
Well, keep an eye out for her while, sorry, Jessica, for the interruption.
That's okay. So I really have to thank the individuals that helped me think through a lot of these issues and come up with the proposal before you. What I plan on doing is just breaking down the main topics that were addressed through your memo, and then you guys can ask any questions that you have, and we can go through the legislative proposal if you would like as well. The legislative proposal, I did my best to add in the comment sections the rationale behind each of them, and they should tie to the memo pretty well. We had a couple meetings and several back and forth emails, and our end result is that we reviewed 29 statutes and regulations that were impacted. We have recommended that 4 statutes be amended, 5 be repealed, and 1 be added to condense the licensing requirements into 1 statute. We also are recommending that 5 regulations be amended and 15 of them be repealed. My whole goal with this was to not have to go through the normal rulemaking process, and we can do that by making the statute cover all of the requirements itself, and so there would be no regulatory effect if we just do a section 100 and strike the regulations that are impacted. And so that was the goal in mind. So with any changes, we wanted to keep them in the statute, and then we would be able to file a Section 100 rulemaking. The good thing with the Section 100 rulemaking is it is a lot faster to do. It's a form that we fill out and submit, and we don't have public comment periods or anything like that. And the reasoning is because there should be no regulatory impact to it. So we have to keep that in mind when we're doing these proposals, what would be covered under statute that we no longer need in the regulation. So with that, the biggest impact we had is to our out-of-state licensees. So currently under 4848 subdivision B, it sets out a reciprocity requirement. So if they are licensed in another state, they want to come here, but they don't want to have to take the CSBE, they have a number of requirements that are in here. I do want to note, though, some of the requirements are already required of any other applicants, like taking and passing the law exam. So that wouldn't go away. But what does go away is the requirement for the 2,944 clinical practice hours and also that California curriculum. So because the reciprocity pathway essentially goes away, since it was in lieu of taking the CSB examination, all of the other requirements also go away. And so all out-of-state applicants would be just applying through the normal pathway of all of our applicants. However, we have a statute that's section 2015 in our regulation in section 2015 that puts a time limit on the amount of time that they can take and pass the examination. So even if we eliminate the CSBE, you still have the national examination and then our law examination. And so by removing this pathway, we essentially still have this other barrier to where anyone who had passed the exam over 5 years ago, they would essentially have to retake the national exam. And so that's one thing where we didn't come up with a firm recommendation from the work group on how to address that. We felt that it's something that we'd really like the board to discuss on how they would like to address that. There are some people who have raised concerns about applicants who are licensed in another state who have maybe not actively practiced, but they maintained their license. But if they are in teaching capacity and haven't actively practiced, is that a concern that the board needs to look at? In talking with Dr. Nunez, one of the solutions was looking at their continuing education requirements. And the thought is, if their continuing education requirements are similar to ours, is it really a concern as far as how much they practice because they maintained the education that's available? And so the board can do a few things. After discussing how to address it, the board can write language into the statute that would essentially supersede the regulation itself, to where you remove any kind of time limitation onto that. And then that would allow us to just strike the limitation in the regulation through the section 100. Or the board has an option of doing something similar to what other boards have, as far as requiring continuing education equivalent to what is already required in the state. And so it would look something, and I have language that I can show you if it would help a little more. But how it would work is they could either retake the national exam, or they can submit continuing education that's equivalent to what we require for the current and the preceding year. And that way you make sure that they have maintained their education. So with that, I just wanted to open it up to the board first to see if this is an issue you'd like to address, and then if so, what are the concerns and how can we address them?
Yeah, like I said, I think the memo is very well written. I think there was one point that you made that if this is implemented, we'll be able to streamline the number of applications that the board currently has to have was 9, and that would take it down to 2. And I was going to quiz the board members to see if they can list all those 9 applications, but I couldn't even do that. So we'll save that quiz for tomorrow morning. So the big issue is I guess we can talk about the time difference between the national board exam and licensing. You did also provide, I think you put a question out to different states on waivers for the national exam, and some states have no language for restrictions, and others do. My opinion is that if a veterinarian is coming in from another state and they're in good standings and they have CE requirements that are similar to ours, then I would not be opposed to granting them a national exam waiver, because I've been in good standing all these years and maintained my licensing CE requirements, but I took my nationals. It was still called the NBE, and then I also had to take the CCT, and I would not be able to practice if there was not a waiver. But that's selfish of me to say, but that's my opinion. Any other board members have thoughts on the waiver issue in particular for the national exam?
It's Kathy. Jessica, I know you guys provided, and that was great, in one of the attachments, sort of what other states, I was interested to see, do we have a summary of what other states, in terms of the 60-month, where's my notes here? Sorry. The 60-month limitation, what states, I saw some don't have a waiver at all, some do. Do we have any kind of numbers that's, out of 50 states, actually address it or whatever? I just wanted to see where we were with regards to the other ones.
Yeah, so I don't have that breakdown of the specific data. I just have the responses that I provided from AAVSD on what they do. But you can see that it varies across the states. Some put a specific date for the exam. If it was after this date, then they have to do something else. And if it was before it, then they don't, or vice versa. And so I don't have the actual breakdown of the numbers, but all of the information should be in the packet that I included.
Can I say that I particularly enjoyed Arkansas's response to that question? Arkansas does not have a retake requirement. We accept the applicant's passing scores of the MBE or NAVLE, regardless of when it was taken or what their work situation has been. Go Arkansas. And Sarah Huckabee Sanders is running for governor there, I think. And I know it's supposed to be a year of unity, but I like that response.
Dr. Nunez, I can actually say that I agree with that. I had a different perspective previously that some veterinarians may have been specializing or not practicing, and they would be not as proficient in certain areas. But with the shortage that we're having of veterinarians and barriers to licensure, I think we just have to trust that they would uphold those minimum standards that we've set. So I have changed my tune, and I think I agree with Arkansas.
Well, I am promoting a waiver of the nationals, but I am still in support of the veterinarian having been employed full-time within the last 3 years, and also having certain CE requirements. So at that point, eliminate the possibility of somebody who hasn't been practicing for 15 years suddenly decide they want to come and practice in California. But I am in favor of the waiver for the national board exam.
I don't know about the being in full-time practice the past 5 years, because there are different factors that could impact that. They could have had an illness, maybe they were working part-time and doing some sort of educational things, but I think you're right, with 15 years not in practice is a big gap, so maybe we could establish a shorter timeline of some sort.
I think the timeline is 5 years before proposal. But we can talk more on that as well. But let's try to focus on the national exam waiver, the time that you've taken the national exam to the time of application for licensure in California.
Well, this is Kathy. I, as a consumer, I know we have a shortage, but I still would like to have a vet that I'm going to have taken the national exam, within the last 10 or, and been practicing in the last 10 or 15 years. It seems like if they took it 15 years ago and then didn't practice at all, I guess they still have to do their CE requirements. I think they'd be a different kind of a vet than one who had been practicing. So that concerns me about, making that too much farther out. Anyway. And I'd say the NAVLE changes regularly as written. The questions are updated pretty regularly as needed to reflect changes in veterinary medicine and pharmacological stuff and species-specific things and whatnot. So taking the NAVLE 20 years ago is different than taking the NAVLE today, of course, especially if you haven't been practicing.
So why wouldn't you apply that criteria to all licensed veterinarians, only to ones that are coming into the state? If that's your line of reasoning.
No, that's true. I agree. It should be kind of across the board. And I was also wondering what other health boards do on this. I was thinking about asking Jessica about, do other health boards have a some sort of a waiver?
Similar to the state boards, the healing arts boards also differ across boards as well. Some have a time frame of when they can take the exam, and if they took it before that specific date, then they have to retake it. If not, they don't. And then some of them, similar to some language that I have, if you want to factor in continuing education, they would require either you to retake the exam or supply proof of continuing education equivalent to that current and preceding year for that state. But it is across the board.
Just a real quick point, and I'm still waiting to be let in. I believe that in California, we assure that our veterinarians are practicing high quality medicine because of our CE requirements. And so as long as out-of-state veterinarians want to apply, I do believe that our CE requirements, if they're made equivalent, would compensate for passing a national board exam more than 5 years ago. Because if you did make that requirement, I think that would not do anything to lower barriers for veterinarians to come in, because veterinarians from out of state might say, I don't want to take the nationals yet, and decide not to come here. And I also like Oklahoma's response. That was the one where the legislature's son didn't pass his nationals. And so he wanted the waiver made. I don't know how true that is, but it was a humorous response. You guys don't have as much opinion as I thought you would.
So I guess my question to the board then is, how would you like to proceed? Would you like to proceed with having legislation to completely supersede the time limit requirement and accepting the examination regardless of when they took it? Or would you like to proceed with a legislative change that either puts a specific time limit on it, or to accept continuing education that's equivalent to our requirements?
I personally support option one.
Which would be to eliminate the time period altogether.
Well, would grant a waiver for that 5-year limit. I mean, the language for you have to take the, I don't know, however it's best written, that you either, just eliminate it, I guess. Well, gosh, it is complicated. Any other thoughts from board members or can we open up to public audience? Maybe,
We did ask that Dr. Miller and Dan Baxter be promoted as panelists too to participate in the conversation, so we can have them weigh in as well. What I can do is I can share some language that Tara provided to provide different options, and so I will stop sharing and share my screen quickly, and then we can reach out to Dr. Miller and Dan Baxter if they have any questions while I'm sharing.
And these are just out-of-state licensees. These are not regular licensees. So if they've been practicing in good standings, I guess I'm comfortable assuming that they did pass a test. So even though that language sounds strong, eliminating that requirement, in order to be practicing elsewhere, they would have had to pass that test at some point in their careers. So I go back to option one, is what I would support.
So are you able to see the options on my board, on my screen that I'm sharing? It says revisions to new business and professions code. Can you guys see that?
I can.
Yeah.
Or get a little bit, just
I will, yeah.
slightly. Thanks.
It's just small.
Okay, so option one, this is having them retake the NAVLE or provide continuing education equivalent to what's required. So I'll just give you a few minutes.
While they're reviewing that, can I ask the host to promote California Veterinary Medical Association to panelists? That's Dan.
Thank you. I will do so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So this is actually would be Dr. Nunez's option two. Option one that he would be recommending is this second option that is essentially it eliminates this section here, so similar to the first option, but then it writes in some statutory language that would supersede 2015 in the time limit.
It keeps the CE requirement though, right? From the first one?
No, so that would be option one would be to have them submit proof of CE for the current and the prior year, and it has to be equivalent to what we require here. So that would be option one. This is option two that essentially just completely removes the time limitation on the examinations. So if I'm understanding Dr. Nunez is correct, this is the option that he is more for.
What page is that?
So this one is not included in the materials. This is something that we worked on after we had posted the materials. And Tara actually just provided me an updated one showing the second option. So thank you, Tara, for working again on your lunch break with me.
Can you scroll up a little bit?
Sure. Do you want to see for the first option?
I want to see all of the options that you're presenting.
Okay.
So option two, start there.
Option two on this or option two for that includes the continuing education?
Whichever one you think I'm in favor of.
Okay, so I believe you're in favor of this option. From what I'm understanding, if you want to put no time limit onto the examination. So this part of the statute, this is actually what provides the authority for section 2015 to be able to say what's equivalent to the examination. And so that's why Tara put in to remove this section, but we also think we need a specific statement in order to be able to do a section 100 to strike the time limitation, which is why we added the section here.
Okay. Does this option have the language that the veterinarian has to have been employed in practice?
No, so that requirement that you're referring to is in the reciprocity statute, and those are for the out-of-state applicants who do not want to take the CSBE. So they would have to do the 2,944 practice hours. Because we eliminated the CSB, that requirement goes away because they would not need to take the CSBE.
Oh. So this is not necessarily restricted to out-of-state applicants. It's everyone, even.
Right, so this would be for everyone, just stating that the examination, so it's the same across the board, the examinations have no time limitations.
Okay. Then I don't think I'm in favor of this. Because I was only referring to out-of-state veterinarians in that waiver. But let me think about this.
This is Tara. I do think that's an important point that because you're removing the CSBE, you're removing the 2,944 hours of recent, in the past 3 years, practice of veterinary medicine. And that issue has come up a lot with respect to foreign veterinarian applicants who may be licensed in another state but have been practicing veterinary medicine in a foreign country, not Canada, for perhaps the past 10 years. So they may not have recent experience practicing veterinary medicine under minimum standards that California would normally recognize.
So, yeah. So I don't think we should change much on what veterinarians who have gone to our schools have passed, what they have passed in the national exam and the state, but now just eliminating the state and then leaving the national requirements as is. That includes the 5-year limit on passing the nationals and applying for a license. So I'm not in favor of C.
Okay, I'm so sorry. I was having trouble hearing all of that, so I don't think I understand then what you would like to see differently.
This is just a regular application for people applying for a license in California. Since we're taking out the state board, then I would still expect them to pass the nationals within a certain amount of time. I don't think there's a lot of veterinarians in California who don't have a license right now, but want to all of a sudden get the license because you can. I was just thinking about the ones coming in from out of state and applying that in their time of waiver. But again, with the issue of barriers and increasing our DVM numbers, maybe I'm wrong with that assumption. So I would be in favor for new graduates that are coming in. Everything's the same except for us to get the state examining board. But for all the new people that are coming in that are not recent graduates, I would like for them to have passed the nationals within 5 years, or if you haven't, if you've been practicing someplace, and I would assume it's someplace other than California, that's you already have your license, then I think that they should be practicing and they should have CE requirements similar to ours.
Can I jump in? I'm really sorry. This is Dr. Noland, and I had to go check some horses that were being flooded out of a paddock, 24 of them, and then I couldn't get back home because they closed my road. So it's a little crazy down here in San Luis Obispo. But anyway, I'm sorry that I'm coming in late, but I have thought a lot about this, Dr. Nunez, and I really think it's important that we don't make this so complicated that it becomes another barrier for access. And I think that if I remember correctly, when they were talking to us, they were presenting us with the data that showed that our state exam was very, very similar to the national board, we talked about it being very similar probably for at least the last 10 years. So I do think 5 years is an awfully tight time frame. And I also would want to say that from a consumer protection standpoint, have you thought about the idea of requiring a CE audit after their first 2 years of licensure? So in other words, we automatically audit any of our new out-of-state licensures. I'm not sure how to tag them, but instead of actually upfront making it really complicated to actually get your license, what if we gave them that 2-year grace period where they actually where we knew we audited their CE, and then if there are any complaints or whatnot, that we have, because they have a license, we have the ability to pursue any problems. I think it's really difficult to assume someone is competent or incompetent or whatever. Everyone has a very different scenario. So I'm just trying to look at it from a little different standpoint and say, okay, let's say you have taken the test, the national boards within the last 10 years and practiced in another state. Instead of going back and looking at each one of their CE requirements at the state they're coming from or whatnot, we just tell, okay, here's the deal. You will automatically be audited in 2 years. You have 2 years now to get that much CE, and that way just kind of give them the benefit of the doubt. But we still have the ability to protect the consumer because we, if there are any complaints, we have the ability to. They're licensed in California. We have the ability to pursue that. Anyway, just something I've been thinking a lot about.
It's Kathy. Dr. Nolan, I'm glad you're here because I was going to ask, because I know Dr. Bradbury isn't here, but you two were on the committee that sort of dug deep into all of the things that would have to be changed regarding this. And I was just wondering what the thoughts were and discussions were on this out-of-state licenses when you came up with these and working with Tara and Jessica and the staff, these proposals. So I think you addressed some of that there, but I just wondered if there's anything else. Because you guys have been looking at this a lot more than we have.
Yeah, and thank you. Again, I apologize for being late. I know Jessica would love to probably shoot me right now, but I was doing my best. I almost ran through a road closed sign. I thought I better not. So I think that the idea that the California State Board exam is very, very similar to the national boards is very simple when you look at new graduates, right? Dr. Nunez, that's very simple. What gets a little bit fuzzier is the whole reciprocity. And yet I do think that also is a barrier to good veterinary care in our state. And so I think it's important that we not make that so loopholed and so complex that people go, well, forget it, I'm not doing that anyway. I think that that's really important that we make it streamlined. And there are some things in this package that will, for instance, they won't have to do the temporary licensing and that sort of thing. But I just don't want to put, and I can't speak for Dr. Bradbury per se, but I know from listening to all this and going through it, I really don't want to take something that we're trying to simplify and trying to use to allow better access to veterinary care and complicate it by then putting all sorts of regulations and nuances to the rules. I think it's really important that it be fairly simple. And again, we're talking about minimum standard of care here. That's our goal is minimum standard of care. And if you have a veterinarian that has been practicing in another state and does not have any sort of disciplinary action against them, which we're going to check for, then it seems to me that giving them a window of 2 years to do their CE, even if it wasn't the same requirement that they came from, is an act of good faith in trying to assure adequate access to veterinary care.
First of all, you are a Wonder Woman for going and rescuing 20 some odd horses on your lunch break while still participating in a board meeting. And I think I understand and agree with you. So would your concerns be satisfied with this option that's on the screen? There be no time limitations on taking and passing the exam?
I would be, but I'm not sure you would, but I would be happy with that because I think yes, simple.
Yeah, I think I'm going to go with my first instinct and still be in support of this option.
I have a question. With regards to the passing of the NAVLE and getting licensed, because I wanted to let's talk about like the foreign graduates. We do have foreign graduates that apply into the program that would take the NAVLE, pass it, but it would take a while for them to complete the CPE. And so before they complete the CPE, they will not be practicing as veterinarians. And so I don't know if it's within the 5-year window that they will be able or they should be able to complete the CPE, but regardless, they're not getting the practice at that point. So I just wanted to make sure that we're also considering that aspect of being licensed or being cleared for the NAVLE, but not really practicing, even if they were technically from another state. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of put that on the radar.
Cleared for safety for the NAVLE or using the NAVLE regardless of past date for the application?
I guess with the moratorium that we're putting on the NAVLE, I just wanted to make sure that we're also considering that people may have passed the NAVLE, but not necessarily practicing yet.
I think your concern would also be addressed by this option.
Yeah.
And can I clarify something on the CE? Sounds to me, after Dr. Nolan spoke, that waiving the practice time, but having them take the CE in the first 2 years of their license in California and get audited would be where you're thinking versus have the CE under their belt already when they request their license in California, which is in option 1, I think. Option 1 had removed the time period of practice, but required the CE to have been fulfilled, I believe. Is that correct, Jessica? I don't know.
Yes, that's correct.
So we need to change this slightly to address that taking the CE within the first, or making sure the CE is audited for the first 2. They'd have to take it anyway for relicensing right after after 2 years, but.
And is that what really you proposed, Dr. Nolan, is rating the practice hours or just the CE?
I'm sorry, I missed that, Mark. Can you say that again?
Was that a summary of what you proposed correct? Did you also propose waiving the practice hour requirements for?
Well, I'm sorry, I dropped in very late, so I didn't see the actual A and B proposals that you're talking about, but I am in support of practice hours. In other words, I do think we need to be careful. There are some people who have, let's say, paid up their dues for year after year and not practiced and maybe, done something for the last 5 or 10 years. That would be a little bit concerning to me, but I'm talking about people that have practiced in a certain amount of time within the last 5 years or whatever the option says. I'm just talking about not having a requirement that they do certain CE before they come. Some of them will already have it because some states have very rigorous CE requirements as well, but some won't. So I'm talking about not requiring that extra CE, and I'm also talking about not requiring the national test to have been taken within a certain time period. Does that clarify what I was talking about?
Yeah, I understand I think that Kathy mischaracterized your position though. I think she claimed that you were.
I'm sorry, I was confused about that, but you did not need the recent practice within the 5 years.
Can someone show me on the screen or somewhere, or, I can look it up in my notes, but you mentioned an A and a B. I didn't see that.
We just had option B up.
Okay.
If Jessica
Need to
went to option A.
While we're searching for the text to show Dr. Noland, I just want to point out that the current proposal before the board does not have any recent practice requirements for out-of-state or out-of-country veterinarians to get California licensure.
But we do
So
require them to take a state exam, right? So
that's the point. We're removing the state exam requirement. There's no longer any recent practice requirement that was fitting with that state exam provision. So what's before you right now is applicants anywhere, whether they're fresh out of veterinarian school or coming from another state or another country, as long as they take the NAVLE and take the state law exam, which is the regulations and statutes exam, they could get California licensure. So if they pass the NAVLE, and what we're talking about right now is they could pass the NAVLE 20 years ago, not have practiced anywhere recently in the past 20 years, whether that's another state or practicing overseas. So we don't know if they're up to date on any minimum standards. As long as they took the NAVLE at some point 20 years ago and passed the state exam, the state law exam, they could get a license. So we have no measure at this point of whether or not they're up to speed on minimum standards. And I think that's why there was the initial proposal to offer up, if you haven't taken the NAVLE in the past 5 years, then at least provide proof that you've kept up with continuing education, because we have no way at this point under this proposal of requiring recent practice experience.
Yeah. So going back to my point, as a regulatory body, what we have to ensure is that a veterinarian is qualified to practice unsupervised. And in my mind, I've kind of broken that down to, if you just finished school and passed your test, everything's still fresh in your mind, and you can practice unsupervised. If you don't fall into that category, you may have taken your nationals years and years ago, but I think it's important to see that you've practiced, have clinical hours present, and CE requirements to show that I may not have graduated within 5 years, but I have experience. I think as long as those two standards are met, I think we will be doing our job as a regulatory body to ensure that these licensees can practice medicine unsupervised.
So I would respond to that, Dr. Nunez, by saying that I don't think taking CE is any sort of guarantee that a practitioner is maintaining their minimum standards of practice. I think having practiced at least half time in the last 3 years and not having any disciplinary action is just as credible a barrier or a measurement as some CE hours. Because I think you and I both know that there is some CE and there's other CE, and oftentimes we try to take CE in areas we feel weak in, but I think some people just take CE to take CE also. So I guess in my mind, if we have this, this is actually about 2,944 hours is about half time in the 3 years preceding the application. So to me, if you practiced about half time and have no disciplinary action against you, to me, that's about the same bar as taking CE. And maybe it's a better bar, because I think if you're making mistakes, I don't know if CE is going to help you fix your mistakes, or if actually clients that are unsatisfied in reporting you are.
Well, traditionally as a state, we do believe in continuing education. Otherwise, we wouldn't have that requirement in our licensing. Your point is well made. Just because you have CE hours doesn't mean it makes you a better veterinarian. But we can only regulate so much. Can't ensure that everyone's perfect. that if we eliminate CE requirements, I think we would be doing more harm than good.
Well, of course, I don't think we should eliminate them. I think we should warn them that in the first 2 years of their practice here, we are going to audit their CE hours at the end of that and give them a chance, to get those done. Some people may be coming from states that require a lot less CE than we do. And it would also give them a heads up that California requires a lot more CE hours, and we're serious about it because we're going to audit you.
Well, with the previous discussion about the possible goal of having 100% CE audits for all of our licensees, that would address your point.
Can I make a statement? If that is the route that the board will take, then we're going to have to go back again to statute, because statute currently says that registrants with the board during their first CE cycle are not subject to the CE requirement. And that was largely put there for students. And we did not take that into account when we did this comprehensive package. The other thing I'd like to point out is the board has statutory authority right now to audit everybody, and there doesn't need to be something written in statute that says they're going to get audited. The board has the ability to do that at their discretion whenever they want to do, so that's just more of a policy with the board, and the policy's been limited for fiscal reasons that, they can't do as many audits as they'd like, but maybe that'll change. But if they were going to do that, we would have to go back and change statute, and that might really adversely affect the students who, are fresh in their education, as Dr. Nunez said, who don't have a lot of extra money to do CE, who are, working their tails off to get ahead of their student loans in their first couple years out. And so that might be something you have to consider.
Dr. Grant, Dr. Miller, why do you always have to remind us about the fine points? Very good at that.
This is definitely a challenging part. And when we did this work to come through this, it just came down to the board's just going to have to decide what you guys want to do, because the other states are kind of all across the board. Some do no waiver, some do 60 months. It's just going to have to be what you guys decide, to take the test or not to take the test. And that's the tough job you guys have. I hope you're getting paid a lot.
Can I comment on what Dr. Miller said? I do agree with you that, students are strapped, financially when they come out of school, but I'm not sure I agree that they don't need CE as much as other people, because I think they are really on a steep learning curve. And I do think that it is as important for them to take CE as anyone else. So I know it's right now we've given them a break and that sort of thing, but I'm not sure that's always the right course. Now, if we had CE that wasn't if they could the truth is we have more CE now that is less expensive because we can do CE online. COVID-19 has helped us learn that that is actually a less expensive way to get CE if you don't have to travel to a venue, stay in a hotel. That may change when things lighten up. I agree, but it's just, it is a little bit, I'm not sure I agree with you that, well, no, not with you, but I'm not sure that I agree that students fresh out of school don't need CE.
Well, how about this thought? Again, if anyone agrees with my assessments for two basic insurances that a licensee is qualified to practice unsupervised, whether you have graduated recently or whether or not you have experience. The first part, if we keep that 5-year, should we also add have graduated from the accredited program within 5 years? Because you could have someone who graduated 30 years ago, but then got a really good study guide and passed the nationals within 5 years. So if you have those two requirements for passing and graduating within 5 years, that'll take care of all the new graduates, so to speak, to ensure that they are qualified to practice unsupervised. And for all others, if you haven't met those requirements for 5 years, then I don't think that there should be any time limits on when you graduated or when you took the board, but there should be requirements that you should be licensed somewhere and practice a certain amount of clinical hours within, I think it says 3 years.
Yeah, so I have the language on the screen for what's in current law, and I would caution the board on adding additional requirements that aren't already in existence on population of applicants that are outside of this conversation. But this whole CE idea was thought to be in lieu of the clinical practice hours. But if the clinical practice hours, getting rid of that is the substantive concern, perhaps what we could do is take this language for the clinical practice hours, and instead of, so I'm going to put this language back up. So instead of it saying passing submitting proof of the minimum education requirements, then they would just have to submit proof of the clinical practice hours. So we would have the same language as in the existing law and applying it to this change. And that way we're not really adding additional requirements that are already there for out-of-state licensees, and you guys are still confident that they've received the clinical practice hours within the last 3 years.
That's actually what I was going to suggest. I was kind of rewriting it here, but if that's where the board wanted to go on the hours.
And so that way we just assume that if you have passed the nationals within 5 years, you're probably a new graduate. And that one example of a person not in the record, just said the practice guide is probably an outlier that we shouldn't focus on. And I would be okay with that. So,
Chief Nolan, would that eliminate your concern as well for I'll go back to the 2,944 clinical practice hours, so that would remain, we would just put it into the proposal that I just displayed.
Yes, 5 years, is there a magic number for 5 years? Is that, why 5, Mark? I'm just curious. Why not 10?
So that 5 years actually came from 2015 because the regulation itself said the 16-month period. And so we were trying to mirror what existing law was, which is where the 5 years came from. But the board, we're changing it now, so it's up to the board whether or not you want to change that.
And again, maybe I'm putting too much weight on the comment that was made that the test has really probably not been necessary for the last 10 years. That's not a magic number either. So, that the California test has been replicating the national boards for more than 5 years. So I'm okay with 5 years if everyone else is. I'm not glued to that. I just, not sure why now I know why.
So again, for anyone that wants to apply for a license, no matter whether or not you're a new graduate from California or out-of-state veterinarian or anything, you have to pass your nationals within 5 years. You don't have to take the state board, that's eliminated. You have to take the law and regulation exam. You have to graduate from a school. And the only exemption is if you didn't take the national exam within 5 years, you add the language that currently applies to the out of state in regards to clinical practice hours within 3 years, but eliminate the CE requirements.
Right, so it would look exactly like this all the way up until here. And then it would say, or submit proof of, and then we would take the language out of, let me pull it back up. Out of this section. So they would submit proof that they held a current and valid license and just take that verbatim.
So what do you think about offering it as an either or, Mark?
You mean for the nationals?
So there would be three things they could do. They either could take the test again if they've been it's been over 5 years from the national test. They could take the test again. They could submit proof of completing a minimum of continuing education requirements for the current and preceding year, or they could show proof of having been in practice 2,944 hours of the last 2 years.
I know that question was posed to Mark, but Jessica, if I can just interject, if you go back to the other screen, Dr. Nolan, if we take the language verbatim from number 1, by default, if they hold a current and valid license in good standing in another state, then they've completed the continuing education requirements of that state.
But Grant, some states don't even have continuing education requirements, or they're very, very small. And some states have a lot. And some people have practiced, less than half time, and some have practiced more than half time. I'm trying to just keep it as broad as possible and still protect the consumer to allow the most access we can of veterinarians. That's all. And you're right. I'm not trying to make it complicated, but I'm just saying that, if someone, let's say someone took parental leave for a year in the last 3 years or 2, you know what I mean? Someone was going through a parental leave period of time. Well, they could jump in and do the CE hours and still move with their partner, to California. Does that make sense? So I'm just trying to give them options so that we could attract them to California.
Sure. Well, does the CE hours that we're requesting back in Jessica's proposal, are those RCE requirements?
Yes.
Okay. That might be hard for them to do, because you're saying you needed to, in the past 2 years, have taken 36 units of CE, but oh, whoops, here you are today, right now, wanting to move to California, and did you have the foresight to know that you needed to take 36 units within the last 2 years?
So, Dr. Miller, that's why we wrote for the current and preceding year. It's not the 2 years preceding. So this language is mirrored off of optometrists for them to not have to retake the national exam. So how it worked out is because the states are all over the board, the ones who have more requirements than us, it's not even an issue, they just submit it. But for the ones who came in, they required less CE than California, then they would only have to make up that amount that they were missing in order to be issued a license. So it's the current and preceding year.
Okay, that makes sense.
I think we're getting close.
Well, this is Kathy. I think that the 2 ors is the broadest possible approach to allowing reciprocity of coming into the state while protecting consumers, given practice time or CE or retake monopoly if there's a certain lag activity. In my opinion, that seems to be, I know it's possibly more complicated because there's more options, but it would give, I think, practitioners more ability to successfully complete it.
I would support the 2 or proposal. That's OR, not OAR proposal. I'm worried mostly about those that not practice but are submitting CE hours, but I would support it.
This is Tara. I'm typing something up here, and I know that you guys are trying to come up with various ways for someone to satisfy this requirement if their NAVLE is over a certain period. And I think that you may have more than just 2 ways of giving applicants the ability to satisfy this NAVLE requirement. 1, retake and pass the national licensing exam. If they took it over 5 years ago, then they can just retake it. 2, submit proof of practice in clinical veterinary medicine for a minimum of 2 years and complete the 2,944 hours. That's an existing law. My question there is that we have had foreign applicants practice overseas, but they had an out-of-state license. So they had a license in Colorado,
Right.
but they've been practicing in India.
Yep.
So we have already requested the legislature in our sunset review report clarify this reciprocity provision. Does that clinical practice, does that have to be in another state or Canada? Or would you accept that clinical practice in another country? So that's,
I would not personally. I think it needs to be in a state or province of Canada.
Well, what about the EU and the United Kingdom, who have AVMA accredited schools? A lot of them are U.S. citizens practicing in Great Britain, having graduated from an AVMA accredited school in Scotland.
That shows they had a good education, but I don't know what their regulatory bodies are like. Ensure that their practitioners stay within there. The fact that you graduate from a accredited school and practicing in another country, since I don't know about the regulatory bodies, I can't comment on that.
I would think there are some countries that we would be hard pressed to criticize in that way, and there are others that we would probably question. So it gets rather touchy.
okay, so the third option to satisfy the NAVLE if you passed it over 5 years ago is to complete the CE.
Yeah, that's two or.
Right, so you can either take it and pass in 5 years, or if you already passed it over 5 years ago, you can retake it. You can send in proof of practice hours. I'm maintaining right now. I'm going to email this new proposal to Jessica so she can present it to you all. I'm maintaining the existing language that those practice hours have to be completed in another U.S. state or Canada, because right now we need to come up with something so that we can pass it to the legislature. They can have a more robust discussion as to whether, what countries, should be included in this practice. Alternatively, the individual who's been practicing in India can just satisfy continuing education hours. So that's 3 different ways to do it. So
And I hate to ask about those CE hours in India or CE hours of ours, basically, or grants of CE hours.
So the way the proposal reads is it has to be equivalent to the requirements of this state.
Okay.
And again, this person has to be licensed in a state in the U.S. or Canadian province right now already. So, it's not CE hours from India, so to speak.
Right. But that's for the people who don't have clinical hours in the U.S. and Canada.
Well, I would like to go on record by saying that I have no idea if India has better or worse CE than us or practice standards. I think we need to be really careful about that. We're assuming maybe something we don't know.
Let's make up a fictitious country.
So I have on the screen what Tara just typed up to cover all 3 options.
Wasn't it a minimum of 3 years and completed, or thought the 2944 hours was within 3 years?
You're right, it was.
Okay, on the original.
And also, can you explain what you mean, or submit proof of retake and pass, or submit proof of completing? That's not passing. So what does that mean? Shouldn't you stop it after national licensing exam? Or saying submit proof of passing?
Yeah, actually, I think just ending it at examination would be sufficient, because we don't receive proof from the applicants. They don't say, I passed it, here's my proof. We get that directly from AABSB and ICVA. And so I don't think this part is necessary.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So you asked me about 2 years or 3 years, and I took the 2 year minimum of 2 years and completed a minimum of 2,944 hours of clinical practice from current section 4848, subdivision B, paragraph 1. So I think 2 years is correct.
So do I just have it wrong on the memo? Because I had 48D and it says 3. So I'll pull it up.
So the memo said 3.
I thought it
Yeah.
was 3.
Hold on, I'll pull it up as well. Nope, my computer is not wanting to pull it up. Tara, do you have the regulation in front of you?
So I'm going to read the whole paragraph. The applicant holds a current valid license in good standing in another state, Canadian province, or United States territory, and within 3 years immediately preceding filing an application for licensure, has practiced clinical veterinary medicine for a minimum of 2 years. So they have to practice for 2 years in the past 3 years.
Okay.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
And
So tweak that paragraph however you want. I'm trying to give you language that you can tweak today and approve it so we can get it to the legislature.
Yeah.
So for clarification, that 2,944 hours in 2 years is equivalent to full-time work if you're a government employee.
Hey, be careful there, Dr. Miller. I work my tail off as a government employee, and so does Jessica.
It's a really interesting history where they got that from, because it doesn't, if you look at the standard work weeks and like the holidays and weekends and whatnot, it doesn't really ever add up until you look at the California state work schedule and the holidays that are recognized by the state, and then it lines up as full-time work, which Dr. Nolan, that does impact a little bit your assertion that part-time practice would be sufficient, in out-of-state practice.
So I'm glad you brought that up, because I really think that currently, if you look at the veterinary profession, there are a larger and larger number of people who practice part-time and who job share and who do juggle different things. And I think we need to be really cognizant of that and not punish them. Of course, they do have another option, and that is completing the continuing education requirements. So, I'm happy about that, but it seems like a bit of an archaic way to calculate numbers, and it's a rather strange number also. So I would be in favor of changing that number of hours slightly, or leaving it the same way. I don't, but I will say that I think Jessica works much more than that.
Yeah, I think around 8 o'clock tonight, Dr. Miller, some people on the call might be offended.
It's definitely a strange number, and we had to go back and research why it ended up there and how it ended up in there, but it came in many years ago. But I can tell you, as an equine practitioner, I don't practice full time, but I certainly feel like I practice enough to be able to, competently perform my skills in another state. So for whatever it's worth, I kind of agree. It's not that it's my place, but I feel like Dr. Nolan's point is a good one, that full-time practice doesn't necessarily mean that that's the minimum of what you need to have in order to be safe for consumers.
And I would caution board members to agonize over the details, because, again, we do our best. And there's always going to be examples of people that aren't covered.
Well, I did the math when it said 3 years, when it erroneously said 3 years, and it was about 18 hours, 18.87 hours a week on a 52-week year. So if you had 3 years and 2,944 hours, that was about half-time. If you worked solidly half-time, that would be about the same amount. So that's where I thought it came from. I misunderstood it, but I do think that I agree with Dr. Miller that I do think that you can be very current and practice half-time, and you can easily maintain, I think, a very competent ability set, with a half-time practice. I mean, would you agree, Dr. Nunez?
I do, and I don't think it would be very strenuous to meet these requirements for that population.
Well, that would have to take it back to 3 years,
Or you could
or drop the number.
submit C requirements. If you don't meet those clinical hours, you can always do the C requirements, which are now all on Zoom. So I don't think it would result in less veterinarians practicing the way it's written.
You could also consider extending it to say within the last 5 years practiced a minimum of 3 for 2,944 hours.
It's too late in the afternoon to do the math. Would that make it easier to fulfill that clinical hour?
Yes.
So instead of going from 2 hours worth over 3 years, going to 3 hours over 5 years.
It would still be the same number of clinical hours, which is 2,944, but they would have been practiced within the last 5 years for a minimum of 3 years.
Okay. I think
so. That's a minimum of part-time practice in the last within the last 3 years, basically.
I think that would satisfy both Dr. Nolan and I.
So this is Jessica.
You just say that though.
Jessica, I sent you another revised version of this that incorporates practicing for 2 years within the last 3. So it changes. There we go. Is that? Yeah. So here we have submit proof of practicing clinical veterinary medicine for a minimum of 2 years and completed a minimum of 2,944 hours within the 3 years immediately preceding filing an application for licensure. I also tweaked number 3, complete the minimum continuing education requirements. So if you want to change the practice requirement to within the last 5 years, complete a minimum of 3 years of practice with that 2,944, I would prefer to change this version of it.
Okay.
But where have we landed?
But what you have on the screen, we need to change it minimum of 3 years. Oh, no. Complete a minimum of whatever, increase the 2,944 by 1.2%, and change the 3 years immediately to 5 years. Where the cursor is, that goes to 5 years.
So you're saying to change this 2 to 3 and this 3 to 5? Am I understanding that correctly?
Does the 2 years apply to? Does the 2 years apply to that 2,944 hours?
Yes.
Okay.
So what this means for the board is that if we were to change it to 3 years and 5 years, it will allow somebody to practice part-time and meet the requirement. But what it could potentially do in the worst case scenario is admit somebody into this state who has not touched an animal in the last 2 years. So right now, if somebody's practiced for 2 years full-time, they can take a whole year off and come to this state and meet the requirements to practice. And that right now it says that the state's happy with a 1-year gap. If you change it to 3 years and 5 years, that means that potentially they have not touched an animal for the last 2 years, but what you're giving is the ability for somebody to practice part-time and meet the requirement. Does that make sense?
So why did you propose 2 and 5 year?
Well, the challenge is without changing the 2,944 hours, how do you, the board, accommodate a part-time veterinarian and make them qualified to be able to come here?
Yeah. Yeah, I hear you. So, Dr. Nolan, going back to not changing it, keeping it at where it is right now on the screen. I know that will not satisfy your issue of
So I would suggest, can I suggest something, Mark? If you say you have to have practiced clinical veterinary medicine for 2 of the last 3 years, then what you do is drop that 2,944 down to like 0.5. I can do the math really quickly if you'd like. If you wanted to do 20 hours a week times 52 hours, 52 weeks a year. So if you said you want 2 times 4 20, that would be times 2. That would be about 1,920 hours if you left it 2 and 3, and you dropped it to 1,920 hours. That would be half time.
So is that like 2.5 days a week?
Yeah. Or you could think a little higher. You could go to 2,500. It would be more than half time.
I'm okay with that. I'm okay with it just changing the hours.
So if you left the 2 years and the 3 years and dropped it to 2,500 hours, I think you still have some ability for someone to practice part-time. And
that will address your point of people are not practicing the way that others did. And also would address Dr. Miller's point of potential of somebody not practicing for 2 years.
so if I've done the math right here, Dr. Nunez, it's 24 hours a week is what this, if you were working 24 hours a week for the last 3 years, you would make 2,500 hours.
24 hours a week.
Jessica, so on paragraph 1, retake and pass the national licensing exam, period, strike or submit proof of completing. Thank you.
I think I'm probably sleeping 24 hours a week. I think that's what I'm doing right now.
Well, again, you could do 24 hours a week for 2 years or 16 hours a week for 3 years. You know, in other words, it gives you a little flexibility, but again, they can always do the CE.
I'm good with this.
Okay.
All right. Do we have a consensus to include this, and then I'll move on to the next topic?
Do we need a motion or just consensus?
No, because we're going to do the whole thing at once.
Okay.
All right. So now let me close all my million screens. While we took care of that one, the other ones should not take us long because we do have recommendations for all of them. So the next section that was impacted was the temporary license requirement. We have the temporary license mainly because the California curriculum, it is only offered twice a year, and so the temporary license was created to allow those who want to come to California but are waiting to take that CSBE. They can practice in California as long as they have met these requirements. They can practice under the direct supervision of a licensed veterinarian. Since the reciprocity pathway has gone away, that also eliminates the need for the California curriculum, so that also goes away. So then there's no need for the temporary license itself. So that was that section. So in the proposal, we recommend striking and eliminating this temporary license. There's also the interns as well. But as you see here, these interns have already graduated from the credit school and they hold a license in good standing already. So they already meet the requirements of just obtaining a normal licensure through the normal process. And so we recommended striking the sections that apply to temporary licensees and to the interns and residency program participants as well. For the university licensees, the main thing here was they have a requirement that they complete the California curriculum as a requirement for licensure. We recognize that by removing that requirement for all the out-of-state applicants, the demand for that course will go down significantly. And so the work group really discussed whether or not we should still require the California curriculum for those university applicants. One thing to note, by doing some history and reaching out to the deans of the schools, when this license was created in 2016, it wasn't created with the concern that their education and their training was subpar. It was more created because there was no enforcement mechanism to take if something happened to an animal patient, and the consumer would not be able to file a complaint with the board because these people were not licensed prior to 2016. And so the license was created in order to do that. I think that another consideration with the CSB, since they did not have to complete the CSBE, they thought that they should at least have something equivalent to out-of-state licensees, which I think is where that California curriculum came in. But since the CSBE is eliminated, that's where the work group has landed to recommend striking the California curriculum requirement from the university license applicants. So before we move on, do you have any questions or concerns related to the temporary, the interns, or the university licenses?
I don't.
Okay, this is some of the response here that I got from the deans. They sent me an email, and this is the capture of what they had said, basically what I had just gone over. And so they are also in support of eliminating it. And then last, but, well, I guess kind of last, the whole restructure of the licensing requirements, I found that it's very frustrating for not only applicants, but the staff as well, to just understand what the requirements are for licensure. There's a lot of statutes and regulations that are throughout the book, and you can have requirements on page 5 and then requirements on page 20, and it's hard for someone to go really quickly to what's required. And so what I did is take the statutes and regulations that are staying, that are not being eliminated, I put them into one section. And that way everybody can see clearly, regardless of where they graduated, how long ago they graduated, regardless of if they're licensed in their state, they all go to one statute, and it will be clear right there what they have to complete. The other section is related to an urgency clause. I do have to note this is going to be very tricky to do, especially with COVID and the bills that are they're limited right now, even more so than last year, we're told. And so I did reach out to Patrick Lay at Assembly BNP to see if they would be interested in carrying this bill with an urgency clause. They're not able to do so. We did submit the language over to Ledge Council, though, because the deadline to submit to Ledge Council to get back language was last Friday, I believe. And so we have that language. We're still going to try to get an urgency clause. And the main reason to get the urgency clause is to have all of these changes take effect before the session ends, before January of 2022. This bill would become effective as soon as the governor signs it. So it would have a chance to be effective a lot sooner. So I provided some language. I modeled it off after a lot of urgency clauses I've seen. This would provide the rationale for why we would want the urgency clause. I do know that even if we aren't able to get a separate vehicle with an urgency clause in it, Patrick did confirm that we can include it in our sunset. So regardless of whether we get the urgency clause or not, we're going to be able to include it in our sunset bill, and then it will take effect in January of 2022.
You sunset, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and there definitely is an urgency to it, so hopefully it can be done quickly. Scroll up a little bit. To the,
Up more?
yeah. Up more. Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, do those 9 applications include brevis permits and RTs and controls?
No. No, and you can see too, when you look at the licensing data that we provided in the licensing report, you can see all the different transactions that there are. And so there's quite a bit of transactions, and we're looking to reduce it just down to 2.
Wow. There's 9 applications just for veterinary license.
Right.
Wow.
And I believe that was done at the time because of all the different statutes and regs and all over different areas, so that they created all these different pathways. And so my goal is just to put it all into one and have this one pathway.
This is going to improve our popularity, for sure. Processing times are going to be really reduced. I know that was super complicated, but I'm happy with what we just proposed.
And then the last part is just the regulatory effect. The way that we wrote these statutes, it would allow us to pursue the Section 100 filing, and we can we'll amend 5 regulations, and that's really just striking out the CSBE or things related to the temporary license, California curriculum. I'm sorry, those are just, I think, just striking the CSBE. And then the 15 regs that we're saying to repeal, it's in their proposal. A lot of them are related to the California curriculum and approved providers for the California curriculum.
Can we entertain a motion just based on going over the memo, or do you feel we have to actually go to the language now?
We do, well, it's up to the board. I can go through all of the proposals if you would like, or you can make a motion now.
I'm comfortable with making the motion now.
I'm comfortable with seconding the motion now.
This is Tara. So I want to make a note that the memo does not really discuss the changes we just made to section Business and Professions Code section 4846.
Yeah.
So in your motion, would you please recognize the memo with the additional changes that you made to section 4846?
Yes, we can.
4848. The out of state.
4848 is being repealed. That's the proposal and restructured in a new 4846.
Got it.
And I did read the memo, and then I also read the language that you submitted with your little boxes, commentary on all of them, and I think that there's consensus between the memo and the language.
So Dr. Nunez, I'm sorry, was that a motion that you were making, or you were seeking a motion?
No, I think I made the motion, and Dr. Nolan seconded, and then I accepted the friendly amendment that Tara mentioned.
And can I have a little bit of a discussion, Mark, since we've done that?
Absolutely.
I know I joined late, but I just wanted to thank for all the hard work that they put into it, and I wanted to thank Jessica and her staff and Tara. I know it seems like this is a lot to digest, but they did a fantastic job. I can name out individual people, one of them that did a really lot of amazing thought processes and ideas and whatnot. So I just wanted to really thank this working group and the members of it that did such a great job, and the staff as well, and Tara. So.
Yeah, it was a monumental task performed exclusively by a government employee, Dr. Mills.
I'd like to thank Kathy.
I'd like to say that I think this is really a positive thing that a state board can and should do, and to protect consumers as well as streamline the process and clarify and reduce barriers that are unnecessary for licensees. So in fact, it helps consumers. I think this is a very complicated, obviously, and possibly overdue because, but we are there, and I think we should be proud as a board for producing this. And I agree. I think a lot of the statements, like your necessity paragraph and your paragraph about, the breeze, clarifying breeze for licensees and reducing all those things down. It's just so cumbersome. The whole, everything is in California, more so than maybe other states like Arkansas that don't have some things like this, but, and well-intentioned, but very confusing. And so I think this is a very good thing. This is what boards should be doing. And I'm glad we're doing it. I'm sorry that I agree. I think getting an urgency standalone bill this year is, even though this is very important, is very difficult given the limits that the legislators, governor, the budget, everything is under this year. Just hearings in and of themselves under the COVID situation. So putting it into sunset review, I think, will be a positive thing and also show the legislature that what we're trying to do. So again, thank the staff and Dr. Bradbury and Dr. Nolan for working so hard on this.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second, and before I open up to the public, does anyone other than myself, Dr. Nolan, or Kathy have any comments?
I have one more comment. I'm sorry, but I've talked to a numerous number of students, recent graduates from vet schools in the last month or two during this. I've reached out to quite a few that I've known because I have some contact with academia. And I think this will really bring more students home. I'm really convinced that this will increase access to care because I have had many students that have talked about wanting to come home but have been licensed in another state and just haven't had the time and energy to study for the state exam, and they didn't take it at the beginning. And I really am convinced that this will make a difference in access. So I wanted to share that.
That just made me feel very warm inside. I don't know why. Come home. Any other board members? If not, I'm going to open it up to the public. All right, moderator, could you please open it up to the public?
Thank you. This is the moderator. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment, click on the Q&A icon located at the bottom right corner of your WebEx screen and type "I would like to make a comment" in the Ask field and send it to all panelists.
We should be playing the Jeopardy music at this time. I don't
Dr. Nunez.
I don't think anyone's asked the question.
No requests have been submitted. Would you like me to close the Q&A?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
It's been motioned and seconded. Board members have had opportunity to voice their opinions. There's no public comments. Let's call for the vote.
Ms. Buller?
Aye.
Ms. Laredo?
Yes.
Dr. Solacito?
Yes.
Ms. Yanez?
Yes.
Dr. Noland?
Yes.
Dr. Nunez?
Yes.
Motion carries.
We've been at it for over 90 minutes now, so let's take a break. 10 minutes, and come back at it. We are back, and we have to go back to agenda item number. We're just
Number 8.
number 8 to do a technical issue. That'll take really quick.
Yeah, members, I apologize for that. I don't think that the motion was clear enough to include the direction to me to pursue the Section 100 rulemaking process. And so to be really clear, I'd like to see if the board would entertain another motion, and you can just read it verbatim right here on the screen.
So can I hear a motion for this?
I so move, Mark. And I'll second.
Motion and seconded. Any other members from the board?
This is Tara. Can I just want to be really clear so we can get this in the record. It's a motion to approve the regulatory proposal and direct the executive officer to take all steps necessary to initiate the Section 100 rulemaking process, make any technical or non-substantive changes to the rulemaking package, and adopt the proposed regulatory changes.
Yes.
Okay, I would like to move that, including the updates that we made during the discussion period to the memo.
So this rulemaking wouldn't be impacted by that because we're doing actually it would, because we're still striking that 60 months. Never mind. Thank you.
So motions and seconded. Any other comments from the board? Audience, moderator, open it up.
Thank you. This is the moderator. Members of the public, if you have and I'm turning to the slide at this moment as well. Members of the public, I've turned on the Q&A. If you have any comments, please click on the Q&A icon at the bottom right corner of your WebEx screen and type, I would like to make a comment, and send it to all panelists. Dr. Nunez, no requests have been submitted. Would you like me to close the Q&A?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
If there are no other comments from the board, I would like to call for the vote.
Ms. Buller?
Aye.
Ms. Laredo?
Yes.
Ms. Prado?
Yes.
Dr. Solocito?
Yes.
Ms. Yanis?
Yes.
Dr. Noland?
Yes.
Dr. Nunez?
Yes.
Motion carries. Thank you.
Okay, so I would like to end this meeting at 5 o'clock because I think the board makes wiser decisions before 5 p.m. And because of all the questions Dr. Solacito has been asking, we're a little bit farther behind that. I'm just kidding. But I'd like to change the order of our agenda here. I would like to next go to the presentation of item number 10, and then after that, go to agenda item 11C. And if after we complete those two agenda items, we can pick it back up at agenda item 9. Okay, so the presenters from San Francisco Society of Cultures and Animals and the Humane Society of the United States, ready to present?
Hi, I think we're logging on right now. This is Brandy. I'm one of the 3 people. I think the other 2 are logging on now. We've been trying to follow, but as you said, it took a little longer. So,
hi, this is Janae Valdez. I'm here.
Is Amanda on yet?
This is the moderator. Amanda has just joined and I've promoted her to a panelist.
Thank you. All right, are we ready, ladies?
Can everyone hear me?
Yes. And Janae, you're on as well. You ready to go? Dr. Valdez? We lose you?
Sorry, I gave you the thumbs up rather than a mute, but yes, I'm ready. Thank you.
Oh, okay, got it. All right. Well, thank you so much to the board for inviting us to speak today. I'll just go ahead and get started. I know you've already had a pretty long day. We want to honor the time commitment. My name is Brandy Kensel, and I'm the general counsel at the San Francisco SPCA. And with me today is Amanda Arrington and Dr. Janae Valdez. By way of background, Amanda Arrington is the Senior Director of the Pets for Life program at the Humane Society of the United States, where she guides a social justice-driven approach to create equity in and access to pet resources for people in underserved communities. Under her leadership, Pets for Life has been implemented in over 50 markets across the U.S. and Canada. Ms. Arrington has received many awards for her community outreach work, including the prestigious American Veterinary Medical Association Humane Award in 2018. That's a mouthful. She currently serves as co-chair of the Association for Animal Welfare Advancement's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. She is also the founder and executive director for the nonprofit Beyond Fences. And although she originally hails from private practice, Dr. Valdez currently serves as Director of Community Medicine at the San Francisco SPCA, and there she oversees many of our organization's most innovative and impactful programs designed to bring humane veterinary care to all pets in San Francisco. She's a graduate of Colorado State University's College of Veterinary Medicine, a licensed California veterinarian with decades of experience in the veterinary field, and a nationally recognized advocate for improving access to veterinary care. In addition to her practice in California, Dr. Valdez, she travels a lot, has volunteered thousands of hours with the nonprofit Rural Area Veterinary Services, RAS, for those of you that know, to help meet the veterinary needs of underserved communities throughout the U.S., including the Dakotas, Washington, Nevada, Idaho, Minnesota, Arizona, and Hawaii. So in the next 15-20 minutes or so, Ms. Arrington and Dr. Valdez will explain from their standpoints as experts why expanding access to care is essential to protecting both consumers and animals in California. And then I'll pick back up at the end of the presentation with just some closing thoughts. So with that, I'll turn things over to Ms. Arrington.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Brandy, for that. And thank you to the Veterinary Medical Board for your time today and for your attention to this important issue, the issue of access to veterinary care and the inequity in that access across the state of California. What we've learned in our work in Pets for Life, through carrying out our program mission to increase equity and access to pet resources for people and pets living in poverty and in underserved communities, and what the animal welfare and veterinary fields have started to understand more and more is that it's extremely important to have context of larger systems of racial and economic injustice, because what happens and what impacts people impacts pets. We must identify how we've been complicit in or even directly contributed to systems of oppression and discrimination in our work. And then how do we begin to disrupt and dismantle those systems? The veterinary profession and animal welfare actually has a special opportunity to contribute to and affect change in this area. We've done many things well in animal welfare and veterinary medicine. Over the last few decades, we've made some pretty significant and huge strides for animals. We've brought animals into a very sharp focus, and we propose that what we now need to do is bring the entire picture into focus. That doesn't mean making animals less seen or pushing them into the background. It means that we must grow awareness of the person the animal is connected to, of the environment in which the animal exists, and the community that the animal is a part of. And when we have that greater clarity, when we bring the entire picture into focus, we're much more effective and equitable in our work. Next slide, please. As in the country overall, poverty is unfortunately pervasive in the state of California. And socioeconomics has significant consequence on the ability of people to access veterinary care for their pets. In California, as you can see here on this map, poverty is both a rural and an urban issue. The darker the area, the higher the rate of poverty that exists. rural areas in the state actually have higher rates of poverty, but 79% of Californians live in urban areas. So poverty runs deep in all types of communities in the state. Overall in California, about 13% of people live in poverty based on the federal poverty line, which is set at around $25,500 for a family of 4. That encompasses about 5.1 million Californians. California also has its own state poverty measure that takes into account the cost of living in the state. And under that marker, about 18% of people live in poverty, or around 6.8 million Californians. This equates to 1 in every 6 Californians, and about 4.7 million California households are in poverty. And then there are even more people who are hovering just above the poverty line, but still significantly struggling financially and categorized as poor. And with that consideration, about 35% of Californians are deemed poor. California is second in the country for the number of people who are poor, only behind Washington, D.C. Next slide, please. So while socioeconomics generally is essential to understand and acknowledge, we can't talk about poverty without also talking about race and ethnicity. The two are unfortunately inextricably linked in this country and in California. You can see here that Latino and Black Californians experience poverty at a much higher rate than white Californians. These details matter if we are to offer services that reach all pet-owning audiences, and if we desire to make our industry more equitable. The AVMA estimates that about 53% of households in California own at least one pet. That means at least 2.5 million California households in poverty have pets. And so combine that with California alongside Hawaii and DC has the most expensive veterinary care in the country according to PetPlan. And so the picture becomes pretty clear just how essential it is for us to explore the severe lack of access to veterinary care in the state for millions of people and pets. Next slide, please. So the Pets for Life program operates our flagship location in Los Angeles. And I want to share just a bit about our work in LA because it highlights the racial and economic disparities in one area of the state, but it also represents the reality for so many more across the state. So we have a focus area that encompasses 6 zip codes in East LA. That's the dark gray area that you see here. In this focus area, about 30% of the people live below the federal poverty line, with a median household income of only $30,000. And about 89% of the residents in this area are Latino. This 6 zip code area represents over 306,000 people, and there are only 3 veterinarians to serve this population. You can see that by the green dots. All 3 are on the outskirts of the area also, and one just recently opened in 2019 and does not offer spay neuter services. The other 2 currently either has a license on probation or has been on probation in the recent past. So all in all, access to veterinary care is extremely limited, to say the least. And so to date, Pets for Life has served about 30,000 pets in this 6 zip code area and has collected the same data on every person and pet served. Data that we believe is similar to underserved areas across the state. And so of those 30,000 pets, 70% have never seen a veterinarian before for anything. And 91% were unaltered at the time that we first met them. And this is not because people are uninterested in services for their pets. In fact, people desperately want and need veterinary services for their pets. It is because of the myriad of barriers, like being financially out of reach for people, being physically out of reach because of where veterinarians are located and the transportation challenges that people face, like office hours that are only during the workday, where people with hourly wage jobs can't take off, or if they do, they lose money. The lack of positive engagement and information sharing with low-income communities, and then the real fear that people have that they will be shamed or pressured. The list of barriers is long. And I must note that all of these statistics, all of this information for Los Angeles and for the state is pre-COVID. COVID has not only negatively impacted the health of Californians, but it has left economic devastation in its wake as well. And so we take seriously that this community, along with millions more people and pets across the state, deserve to be seen and heard, and should expect for all of us to use our positions, our power, and our privilege to work towards equity and access to veterinary services. I have heard it for years working in animal welfare and and working at the Humane Society of the United States that these issues are not our concern. Stay in your lane. Well, we have too much information now. We see that human issues are animal issues. We can no longer dismiss our role. Issues of equity and justice are all of ours to contend with. And as the entity representing the veterinary profession and tasked with protecting consumers in the state of California, it's an issue the Veterinary Medical Board cannot ignore either. And so I want to share with you, next slide, please, a very short video. And after the video, you will hear from Dr. Valdez on her important work in San Francisco and her desire to see change in the veterinary profession. This video is from Daniel Abrego in Los Angeles, whose cat Bombay needed an eye surgery, a surgery that he could not afford. And in order to honor the love people like Daniel have for their pets, we must commit ourselves to making a shift and finding more equitable solutions. If you would play the video, please.
This is the moderator. The video will be played shortly.
Hi, my name is Daniel Abrego. This is my cat Bombay. He's basically my life. And I wanted to thank the Humane Society for helping me today with his operation. You guys don't know how much you guys are helping us so much, and how much these guys are actually a member of our family. I thank you so much, and I hope you can continue your services in helping other people. Thank you and have a great day. Say, yeah, Bombay. Thank you.
And now I turn it over to Dr. Valdez.
Thanks, Amanda, and thank you to the Veterinary Medical Board for giving us a few minutes to talk about the work that we are doing in San Francisco. Brandy gave me a glowing introduction, thank you. But again, my name is Janae Valdez. I'm a veterinarian and I oversee the San Francisco SPCA's community medicine program. And most of you probably know our organization is a shelter, but you may not know that we also operate 2 full-service general practice hospitals, a spay-neuter clinic, a low-cost preventative care clinic, and a free mobile vaccine clinic, all within the city of San Francisco. Next slide, please. So when most people think of our fair city, they think of postcard views and tech mecca and general affluence, and this is a pretty accurate picture of life for some residents within the city, but it definitely isn't representative of life for everyone here. And I think we all know that San Francisco routinely makes the headlines for struggles of people experiencing homelessness, but there's an even larger segment of the population who are the marginally housed, working poor, who routinely face housing insecurity and food scarcity. But we rarely hear about these people. And interestingly, an estimated 10% of San Francisco's residents live below the poverty line, and that number increases to 13% of Latino residents and doubles or triples for our Pacific Islander and Black residents. And the map you see highlights animal resources within our city, ranging from full-service veterinary hospitals and specialty hospitals to pet stores and big box retailers. Basically, these are the places where people purchase pet food and supplies. And it may be tempting to think that this map looks the way that it does because population density is low in these areas, or maybe there just aren't that many animals there. But the reality is that this corresponds with our city's highest concentration of Black, Indigenous people of color, or BIPOC communities. And these areas also have the lowest household incomes. And again, this highlights the link that we've seen between poverty and race and ethnicity that we see in California and also across the country. And the area in gray represents our program's focus area. And we chose this because of the resource desert that we know that exists for both humans and animals within these areas. And it's still incredibly difficult for me to wrap my head around the fact that one of the wealthiest and most progressive cities in the country has such an access to care issue, but it's true. And people always ask me how access to care became my passion project. And I think I first became aware of this issue as a veterinary student volunteer for an organization called RAVS, or Rural Area Veterinary Services. And this is a group which provides veterinary care to underserved Native nations across the country. And on my trips to the reservations, I saw really intense poverty and hunger and substandard housing. But what I also saw were people who really loved their animals and just were desperate for resources to care for them. And many of the medical conditions that we treated were things that really could have just been addressed with basic preventative care, but the resources for that care just did not exist. And after I completed my training and went into private practice, I realized that these people and the problems their animals were facing were not unique to the Dakotas or Arizona or Eastern Washington. They were also in rural Northern California and even in the middle of San Francisco. And I realized that these concerns exist within every marginalized community. The location may be different, but the problem is still the same. Poverty and socioeconomics play a really important role in the ability of people to access veterinary care for their pets. And because of this realization, my work has been focused on finding ways to provide these critical services to those who need it most within my community. Our community medicine program establishes a continuum of care within underserved neighborhoods that ranges from free vaccines and flea medications to low-cost preventative care and spay-neuter. And these services probably sound really basic, and yet we know that they have historically been out of reach for a segment of our population, including most of our BIPOC neighborhoods. And this is in part because veterinary service providers just haven't gone there historically. And I should point out that we are charging for the preventative health services and have been able to maintain a sustainable budget. And I mention this specifically because there's an unfortunate misperception that clients in these neighborhoods can't and won't pay for these services, and we know they will, and they desperately want these services. There are sustainable models for providing basic care, and we need to explore these to ensure that we're not leaving entire communities behind. These communities are deserving of relationships with veterinarians, and as a profession, we have an obligation to provide care to all people with animals and meet them where they are financially, culturally, and geographically. And as a profession, we also have to recognize that representation matters. Unfortunately, we have the dubious distinction of being labeled the whitest profession, and until children and young adults of BIPOC communities see veterinarians from and within their communities and see this as a career path, that's not going to change either. And as Amanda mentioned at the beginning of our presentation, the recent conversations around racial and economic injustice have really provided us with a special opportunity to change the narrative about access to care. And I think it's time to start having those conversations. Thanks so much for your consideration. And before I hand the baton back to Brandy, I'd like to introduce you to the Orozco family. This is our second video, and their dog, Chickies. We first met them at our mobile vaccine clinic when they arrived with Chickies and a basket full of adorable puppies. And as Marley will tell you in our next video, they had just taken Chickies in after a neighbor couldn't care for her anymore. The daughters were so excited about the new dog that they took her to the park where Chickies was unfortunately impregnated by a roaming dog in the neighborhood. And they didn't have a relationship with the veterinarian at the time and weren't sure how they were going to care for the dogs until a neighbor told them about our services. And this is their story. Can I get our video, please?
This is the moderator. The video will play shortly. Thank you.
Hola, buenas tardes. Muchas gracias por venir hoy otra vez. Nada más quería que ustedes digan un poco de la historia de su mascota, de cómo fue que se embarazó y tuvo sus cachorros y la ayuda que has tenido aquí.
Hola, buenas tardes a todos los que van a ver este video. Pues Chiquis, nosotros la adoptamos, estaba en un hogar que le daban maltrato. Y un día que andamos en el parque, nosotros no sabíamos del programa y entonces nos informamos por medio de una vecina y como no sabíamos, ella quedó preñada de 4 cachorritos. Nos quedamos con uno y regalamos a otros 2, pero sí es muy bueno este programa porque pudieron esterilizarla gratuitamente y se lo recomendamos a todos
So it looks like that cut off a little bit early, but I think you were able to capture the sentiment. And with that, I will hand it back to Brandy. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Dr. Valdez and Amanda. We can go to the next slide, please. So as this map illustrates, we see a clear correlation between social vulnerability and animal suffering in communities throughout our state. Our organization's interest in access to care stems from witnessing animals being surrendered to shelters by owners unable to afford veterinary care. But as we heard from our presenters today, it certainly doesn't end there. Barriers to veterinary care extend beyond veterinary shortages and beyond financial needs, and they include cultural, language, and geography barriers, to name a few. And basically, why we're here today, the many ways in which California's practice issues and regulatory matters restrict and perpetuate disparities in care. We cannot shy away from clearly and directly acknowledging an unjust reality if we are seriously hopeful to change it. The truth is that many California consumers and their animals don't benefit from the minimum standards of care that the board endeavors to maintain. Instead, they receive no care, and they continue to feel the devastating impacts of systemic poverty and discrimination. And this is not an issue that can be solved by simply increasing the number of licensed professionals. In addition to the board's recent proposed actions in its strategic plan, just yesterday, we were disappointed to hear from Dr. Richard Sullivan on behalf of the MDC during its meeting that, and I quote, "the only way to increase access is to get more veterinarians," end quote. This demonstrates a fundamental lack of understanding at the agency level of the matters at hand. Representation and varied perspectives help California's consumers, animals, and providers. Yet, as we heard here in the US, 9 out of 10 veterinarians are white. So a big part of the challenge is addressing the dominant white culture that persists in the veterinary profession and makes it difficult, if not impossible, to open the door to other cultural norms and standards. For example, there remain practitioners who believe that people who can't afford veterinary care for pets simply shouldn't have pets. Many in private practice also mistakenly view nonprofit and low-cost clinics as unsophisticated, unviable, or even unfair competition. And perhaps most important for the purposes of today's meeting, if the board agrees with Ms. Christy Pulowski of the MDC when she wrote to the San Francisco SPCA just last September, and I quote, "Access to care, albeit important, does not fall under the board's purview," end quote, then there exists an abdication of responsibility. Because one very clear way for the board to protect consumers and animals in our state is for the board to expand its own vision and thoughts about who receives veterinary services in the state of California, not just how. So today, what we are asking of the board is to establish a formal, timely, and robust effort to broaden access to veterinary care in California. And if the board doesn't think that this work falls within its scope, then we are also asking the board to re-examine its mission and what it means to fulfill it. As our entire nation grapples with issues related to privilege and access, it's time to acknowledge that this is the veterinary profession's social justice issue. And while the board certainly isn't responsible solely for creating the barriers to veterinary care that exist in California, as stewards of our profession, a responsibility to address them has landed squarely into your laps. Next slide, please. Please consider today's speakers, the San Francisco SPCA, HSUS, HSVMA, Best Friends, San Diego Humane Society, and the ASPCA, all partners available to the board on this topic. And thank you so much for your time.
Dr. Nunez, you're on mute.
I was saying thank you for that presentation. Very, very relevant, important issues. I'm not sure if you were on the call earlier in the day. A lot of those issues were brought up during the NBC report. And so it is something that I do feel that the majority of this board feels we need to address. Sure. How to do so is the challenging part, but I think it's important. I think it's something we need to consider. Any other questions from any board members?
I actually have a comment. I wanted to thank you all for that presentation. The document that we received had it further broken down just past where you ended your presentation with specifics and how they affect pet owners. And for me, that was so eye-opening. I mean, it's really, really hard for people to appreciate the magnitude of the issue if they've never experienced it. And I've heard that so many times when I was in shelter medicine, that owning a pet is a privilege. If you can't afford them, you shouldn't own them. I think that's arrogant and tone deaf of people to say. So I can't even thank you enough for all of this. But it is such a broad issue, and we've discussed that at the MDC meeting and today. And it just seems there's so much work to be done, and the board itself doesn't have the authority or the resources to do what we want to do. So it sounds like collaborations are definitely the way to go. So starting with this presentation, I just have a question. How do you intend to use this, and how can we help? Because this is so much information that some people just don't even have. They've never heard of these things. And this is explained in such a way that even somebody who's experienced it, it's just so eye-opening for me. You guys are awesome.
Thank you. Do either of the presenters want to take that one, or I'm happy.
Ready?
Yeah, well, I think, honestly, part of us being on this call today is to clarify, what may be misconceptions and whether or not the board thinks that these issues are within its purview. I think that's step one, a clear commitment from the board that these do fall within, your lane of authority to address. And certainly collaboration is essential, but it will take every member of the community, most notably, frankly, the VMB that sits at the, the head of the profession, to start digging into these issues. So I think from us, it would be, we would love to, we live and breathe a lot of this work, right? Many of us have been in nonprofits for quite some time right now, dedicated to this, and we stand by as a resource, every one of those organizations that we listed. So if there's a commitment on the board's end to, dig into this work, we'd love to work with you. And in terms of specifics, I'd love to find out if there's somebody that we can follow up with directly. If you want to take some time and think if you would like to establish some sort of a formal, timely, robust, effort to this, a cadence, if you will, whether it's a subcommittee, whether it's, a formal calendaring, I think that would be a great start, because more time on this is clearly needed than 20 minutes that we had today.
Absolutely. And I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, and sometimes comments are made without thinking them through, but it is actually the vision statement of the board that we can provide quality access to veterinary care. So I don't think that we don't accept that it is. I think there's just a lot going on right now, but I don't know any member of this board here today that doesn't feel very passionately about this. And I'm not the only one. I was in shelter medicine. We have Dr. Solicito, who is in shelter medicine. I know Alana's very passionate. So I want to help in any way I can. I just know that the board doesn't have resources. So we were already talking about that, of what we could do to work with other agencies to pool our resources to address this issue, because it is so important. And thank you again for coming and presenting that.
Yeah, thank you. This is Alana. I just wanted to say thank you, Brandy. Thank you, Amanda. And thank you, Dr. Valdez, for that excellent presentation. And I absolutely do think this is in the board's ability to tackle. And I did have a conversation offline with Kathy, and I really think it's important that our board try and start a committee to start to explore what we can do. I know earlier in the day when we did have the MDC presentation, we talked about a possible legislation that maybe a member could carry, and that we would, maybe lay out some good policy that way. But I definitely think we need to explore this further, and I would like to do that, try and get that calendared for the next meeting possibly, but I really think it's something we need to do.
I would also say in the material we received, I was encouraged to see that a company like Banfield, which is owned by Mars, is paying attention to this issue as well too. I think that there are lots of people and companies of much influence are looking at this, And I'm also encouraged that our new president has also addressed this issue that wants to be addressed by all. So there's reasons to be optimistic.
This is Kathy. I just wanted to butt in here for a second because I agree, and I thank you very much for this presentation. It was interesting to me just looking at even the numbers of veterinary clinics in San Francisco. I counted 22, seemed low to me. I expected there to be more, not just in the gray area, but in the whole city. So I am surprised. But with the groups that are here, Best Friends, the HS, US, etc., I wondered if you had, in addition to coming to our board, started talking to any members of the legislature, sorry about the puppy in the background, or the governor's office. This is a huge systemic problem and issue. And I really think that I wondered if any of the groups had started approaching legislature on behalf. This is a tough year because of the COVID situation. I get it, but it doesn't make this issue any less important. And given your resources, your lobbying, your grassroots organizations, and respect among the bill in the legislature, I just wondered if you'd approach them on any given specific bill ideas, for instance.
The short answer, Kathy, is yes, continuously and always. And, you know, we do we like to think a pretty good job of weighing in on bills, not only the ones that would be helpful to consumers and pets, but ones that would be harmful. And so we're already doing a lot of monitoring and weighing in on proposals behind the scenes right now. We're working on a lot of transparency efforts so that we can see how communities are faring, right? Data and stuff isn't necessarily available. So the more transparent we can be, the more prepared we can be as a movement to sort of tackle these issues. And as you guys know, I mean, you have seen me here before, right? We are working to respond to, you know, legislative, regulatory, and other efforts designed to interfere with a veterinarian's ability to serve all pet owners. It's no secret that we think that telemedicine would be helpful in this regard. We were disappointed to hear where that landed as of yesterday. You know, we've heard and worked with Cal Animals on these veterinary deserts as they pertain to shelters and the premise permit requirements. And there's just a lot of ways in which we can tweak existing regulatory and legislative law to be a more favorable environment and help promote access for all pet owners. So yes, that was a long sort of verbose answer to say, yes, we are continually weighing in. And this obviously falls underneath the governor's, you know, commitment for a California for all, right? This is squarely within that, having communities be equitable. And, you know, we worked on and helped advocate for proposal for funds to be allocated to underserved communities, specifically for shelters that will be marshaled through the UC Davis Current Medicine program starting this year. So we are always open to working with you. We think this is something that, you know, it takes nonprofit veterinary service providers, for-profit, you know, the professional organizations, the pet owners that need the care, you know, animal protection organizations like ourselves, vet schools, you know, social workers, anybody, right? And we stand by ready to help. So I don't know if the others want to add to that, but.
Can you, without any intention whatsoever to incite irritation, do you just address that point? The issue of telemedicine will always be involved in these conversations. That line between access to care and quality of care. Just your personal thoughts on it.
I'm so sorry. It's so hard to hear you.
That between access to care versus quality of care. What are your thoughts, particularly on that point?
My thoughts, I think I speak for both myself and the organization when I say they're not mutually exclusive. We believe that we can deliver quality care via telemedicine. And, you know, we believe in the discretion afforded to veterinarians to determine when telemedicine is appropriate and when it is not. We trust you all. You're all professionals who are trained. I just had to listen to however many hours about your continuing education. Like, we trust you. You know, you want to do right by the animals. And there are situations for telemedicine, and there are situations when it doesn't work. And, you know, for those situations where it works and it works well, we believe firmly that it will help us expand our reach into, you know, neighborhoods, into communities that have not been historically serviced to the level that we'd all like to see.
And if I may, Brady, I just want to add to that I think it's pretty clear that the lowest quality of care is no care at all. And,
Yes.
and that's something that we really have to work to sort of get over and to address. And I think then within that, like Brady's saying, there are ways to have protections. There are ways to ensure that services are being carried out in the highest quality possible. But until we acknowledge that when people get zero care for their pets, that is the worst possible outcome.
Yeah, and that was a point that was raised, you know, very eloquently by somebody at the MDC level, and, you know, certainly in our advocates that we've worked with, is you all know better than anyone the dangers of Dr. Google, right? So there's no care, and then there's probably even worse care with Dr. Google. So, you know, we have to be realistic about what we have to meet people where they're at.
Yeah, and I think telemedicine is only part of a solution from no care to care, not the end-all solution to it.
I agree with you.
You know, I agree with you, where telemedicine is appropriate in some situations and not appropriate in others. The other comment I would make about willingness to pay, my experience is those oftentimes that really don't have the resources to pay that are more likely to go back home and call up a Tio or Tia or the cousins and collectively get money for the pet. And a lot of times the people that do have the money frustrate me the most because they're not willing to spend money on the pet. I definitely agree with that.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Nunez. I can definitely weigh in, and I bet you we all have stories of the incredible things that people have done to support their animals. And thankfully, there's a lot of actual data coming out now that supports the idea that clients from lower income households will actually spend a higher percentage of their income to support their pets. And that's not a call for us to go and gouge those people, but it really does speak, I think, to the willingness of people to contribute to their animal care. And I think there have been quite a few practitioners who just don't believe that willingness exists, and we know that. We've seen that time and time again, and recognizing that makes this a more viable and sustainable format from a business perspective as well.
This is Diana. I just want to thank you for this presentation. It was great. It's very, very much needed, as everyone has mentioned. And then I just want to second again what Alana had brought up earlier about forming a committee and making this something more integral that us as the VMB can really look at and really, delve into. So I just wanted to make another push for that. I know it's giving us more work, but I'm willing to be a part of that and really take a focus on what it is to provide access to veterinary care.
Well, I did tell Christy she needs to get more work done, but definitely we see if we can do more.
Yeah, I agree. I think we should, I'm just going to say, I just don't have that much faith in the MDC and what the recommendations are going to be. And that's why I really think we need to create our own committee, because we have very capable people on this board who are familiar with these issues, myself included. And I think we really need to just, I don't mind shouldering the work to really come back with some concrete things that this board can do
in collaboration with groups like the ASPCA, HSUS, and maybe even some private partners like the Mars companies and Banfield to really put together something strong that we can, push forward with to create some equity.
And I would say something that's multifaceted. I think that's what everyone is saying in their own way, that telemedicine is not the one solution. The legislative efforts are not the only solution. Like, it's going to have to be a really layered strategy in order to address an issue that is really decades, if not centuries in the making, that is so deeply embedded in our society. It's going to take a lot to come up with the solutions. And so a committee would be wonderful to really explore those, to take into all the different areas. I think there's a lot of ideas that just have to see how they fit in with California statute. There are a lot of examples from other states of what some people have tried, the things that have worked well, and that combined with others could, provide some decent contribution. So I would love the possibility of a committee being formed and us being able to really then dig in and work through all of the potential outcomes.
Were those examples included in our package? Those examples of what other states are doing?
Include what? I'm sorry, Dr. Nunez?
You just mentioned examples of what other states are doing. I don't know if that was included in the material you gave us.
No, there are some, like there was just one recent, and I haven't even talked to Brandy and Dr. Valdez about this because I just found out about it yesterday, but Ohio just passed debt assistance for veterinarians that give their time for charitable services, and that's the first time that any sort of debt support was provided specific to charitable work, and that's brand new. So I think it would be working with HSVMA. They've been cataloging a lot of different states' efforts around telemedicine, that in different ways that telemedicine has been utilized. I think there are things that are happening in veterinary schools where making social justice part of the curriculum and offering different rotations for vet students to have exposure. I think there's all sorts of things that could be explored.
Do you by chance have any specific things that have been done by state regulatory bodies, veterinary boards? I know there's lots of examples of things that could be done, but do you have any specific examples of what things other veterinary bodies, veterinary boards have done in other states? Might be helpful.
I think we have pretty good information from others that we could share. Yes, so I don't have any today because I didn't think we would have the ability to make any suggestions or recommendations, so I didn't come prepared for that. But I know through our coalition work, through the HSVMA, the ASPCA Best Friends, every group has sort of been doing their part and really organizing the data and all of the efforts that are happening. So I know that it exists. I think we would just have to come back if that is something of interest of this board, and if there is a committee where we can, provide in detail that information, it's there.
Yeah, we can probably get that info from AABSD if any states have done something specifically for this issue.
Mark, this is Kathy. I just wonder, I think in terms of talking about committees within our board, maybe Tara can clarify. I know the problem is on some committees within our board, we have some limitations, meaning there can only be, I believe, 2 board members on a committee. I know probably a number of us would want to be involved in this, and I'm wondering, I'm not sure we're going to take action today on creating this, but what Tara might suggest that we can do with regard to this committee we're all talking about.
It's funny you should mention that because we already have that meeting set up for Monday. Just to clarify how we can proceed. Not a question of if we can proceed, but how we can proceed.
Yeah, and I think, if I might just, and then I can be done, but it is encouraging to hear, the progress that's been made today. And, I think that if we are going to collectively, willing to sort of acknowledge that this is, the veterinary profession's social justice issue, that it does rise to the level of importance for the board. I am more encouraged by what I have heard today than I have heard in prior committees. And so we thank you. And if you guys want to work together and want to explore whether it's offline or, you know, whatever it may be, ways to formalize this and move forward together, we'd love to work with you.
Do we have any questions from the audience for the presenters?
This is the moderator. I've opened up the Q&A at the request of the board. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment, click on the Q&A icon located at the bottom corner of your right corner of your WebEx screen and type, "I would like to make a comment," and send it to all panelists.
Okay.
Dr. Nunez, would you like me to close the Q&A?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Thank you again for that presentation.
I apologize. Sorry to interrupt, Dr. Nunez. As soon as I closed it, and I think a request may have came in. Give me just a moment. Yes. Bonnie Lutz would like to make a comment. Bonnie, you're unmuted.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I want to thank you. That was a great presentation, and say hi to Brandy. I just wanted to make one comment, however, and I think this is great. And if I can help in any way and be involved as a non-member of the board or anything, I'm happy to be involved. I know a lot of veterinarians in the state, but please do me a favor and stop referring to the probation that those veterinarians are on. One of them is my client. He's a very dear person. He has given away millions of dollars worth of vet care to a lot of his patients. So I don't think that's something that you should be referring to. I've heard it referred to twice now, and it doesn't mean that those people are inferior veterinarians. And if anybody would like to talk to me further about that, I'm happy to do that. But I really think that was offensive. Thank you.
No further requests have been submitted. Dr. Nunez, would you like me to reclose the Q&A?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Any further comments from the board? Thank you to all the presenters.
So where are we on this committee?
Well, no one's made a motion, but
Make a motion to move forward with the committee to start working on these issues.
I second the motion.
I would, it's been motioned and seconded. I would, again, encourage you that we have set up a meeting for Monday within the week as far as how we should proceed, not if we should proceed, but as a personal request, I would like to not form a committee today, and I give you my word that I'm not going to drop the issue, but I would just like to get a little bit more strategy on how we can proceed.
So explain to me what that means.
It means specifically what we have the ability to do as a regulatory board to address these issues, and how we can utilize what I think is a very strong bully pulpit that we have to at least help people that can make a bigger difference to do so.
But don't we need to flesh out what exactly we want to potentially pursue in a committee?
I think we want to increase the accessibility of veterinary care to underserved communities.
Correctly, but how we do it is hard to say right now. Like, we don't know if it's going to be legislation. We don't know if it's going to be, you know what I mean? Like,
I honestly don't think the board's going to solve the problem. I think it's going to be a very big collaborative effort. And we have lots of things on our agenda for every single meeting. And if there's a way to get this done quicker, then forming yet another committee that has to eventually come back and report to us about what their findings were. I just think we could accomplish it wiser after really taking an evaluation of how we should do this. What's the best way to do it?
So you want to wait to hear back from the MDC first and then determine if we'll? No.
I would like to have a discussion with
Yes,
our
can I
executive officer.
Dr. Nunez, can I speak? Can I?
Yes.
So I realize you don't have a lot of faith in the MDC, but the comment that was quoted from me was that it was not in our purview for the NDC because we did not get direction from the board. The MDC cannot act without being given instructions on what to do from the board. So we have now been given direction on access. And so this is what we do. We research and we go through. I am not denying access. This was a fabulous presentation. I took 3 pages of notes. Jessica can attest, I listened to these meetings at least 3 to 4 times. I will go back and I will listen to every meeting 3 to 4 times. That is what I do. So I make sure I get the details and I make sure that we go over them and over them. We then reach out to whomever we are allowed to reach out to. So that is what we do as a committee. And we don't just end it. When we said purview, it's we can only do things at the direction of the board. So now we've been given this direction, we can expand our territory into access. At the time, the MDC was not given that direction. So it's really hard for us to keep creeping into an area when we were not given that permission.
Yeah, and to that point, I hope that you realize that I do have complete faith in the MDC. And to that point, if we are to give you direction, I want to make sure that it is the most strategically successful way to give you direction, which is why I'm asking, I'm using my what's that term, capital, as being a newly elected president, to encourage you to wait a little bit before forming a committee today.
And this is Kathy. Alana, one of the things that I'm concerned about is I think having a committee of this board is more limiting for participation than utilizing the MDC with access for people to observe, participate, get outreach and research. Having only 2 members working on it because of the laws makes it more limited, I think, in such an important and broad-based issue. And that's the worry I have about a committee of the board, because we can't do more than 2 members.
Any other members, because we have a motion on the table and a second. Any other comments from the board? Hearing none, we'll hear comments from the public on the motion to form a committee.
This is the moderator. I will open up the Q&A at the request of the board. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment, click on the Q&A icon located at the bottom right corner of your WebEx screen and type, "I would like to make a comment," and send it to all panelists. Dr. Nunez, no requests have been submitted. Would you like me to close the Q&A?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
If there are no further comments from the board, I would like to call for the vote.
Repeat the motion.
The motion is to form a committee of the Veterinary Medical Board to address the issue of accessibility, that have been outlined in this introduction and in other parts of our meeting today. Jessica, could you call the vote, please?
Ms. Bowler?
No, not the way I understand our committees to work. So I would say I would vote no, sorry.
Ms. Laredo?
Yes.
Ms. Prado?
Yes.
Dr. Solocito?
Yes.
Ms. Yanes?
Yes.
Dr. Noland?
No.
Dr. Nunez?
No.
So we have 4 yeses and 3 noes. So the motion carries. And I just, as a point of clarification, members, the concern about 2 members on a committee, that is true if you do not want to be bound by Bagley-Keene. It allows you to meet more frequently and not be subject to the posting notifications and everything else under Bagley-Keene. But if you don't have an issue with the Bagley-Keene, you just have to abide by the posting requirements and all the public information, then you can have more than 2 board members on it.
Do we have to
I just had a quick question.
It has to be bound by Bagley-Keene. Sorry.
Yeah, so if you have more than 2 members, then whenever time you have that conversation, you would have to post the notice requirement for 10 days and everything else that you're subject to for Bagley-Keene. So you would be
have to
able
be a public meeting, right? If it was 3 of us.
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
I would caution you against putting a quorum of the board on the committee because then you're essentially having a full board meeting.
But we wanted 3. We would just have to post it and make the meeting public.
Correct.
Thank you.
But that would mean that no other board members could be at that meeting. Correct? It would only be the committee members allowed and the public.
Correct.
Do we need to appoint the members to this committee right now?
So according to administrative procedures, the board president appoints committee members.
Do I need to do that right now?
And it's up to you.
Can I do it on Monday?
Yes, you can.
Then that's what I'd like to do. Okay. Moving on then, thank you again for everything. We're going to move on to agenda item 11C. 11C. This will be handed over to Tara to present.
Okay. Agenda item 11C, animal physical rehabilitation. Before you today are proposed board responses to comments received by the board following the 15-day public comment period on the modified text. The board received only 1 public comment letter from the Animal Physical Therapy Coalition, APTC, and California Association of Animal Physical Therapists, who jointly submitted a letter that I will refer to as the APTC letter. 2 days ago, APTC submitted another letter on January 26th. I will also address comments made in that letter. All right, so whomever is running the meeting materials, if you begin with the memo.
This is the moderator. Jessica, should I give you the presenter role?
Sure, I can scroll through the memo with her.
Thank you.
So pages 1 through 3 provide the background on this issue. And then beginning on page 4, I will summarize the comments raised and proposed board responses. The first comment in the APTC letter discusses indirect supervision in a range setting and asserts that mandating direct supervision over the performance of animal physical therapy in a range setting will limit consumer access to qualified professionals, cost consumers more money by having to pay for 2 professionals instead of 1, and take away the veterinarian's choice to collaborate with physical therapists. APTC recommends the regulation have an indirect supervision allowance or exemption for range settings. The proposed board response is shown on pages 4 through 7 and explains that a licensed physical therapist does not hold a license to practice animal physical therapy on animals, but instead is considered a veterinary assistant who is someone not licensed or registered with the Veterinary Medical Board to practice veterinary medical care on animals. The response explains the animal health care tasks that may be performed by veterinary assistants and the veterinarian supervision required for performance of those tasks. The response further explains that APR performed by a veterinary assistant requires direct supervision because APR is considered to be outside the scope of an auxiliary animal health care task that otherwise could be performed by a veterinary assistant under indirect supervision. The proposed board response rejects the recommendation to reinsert a range setting provision and authorize indirect veterinarian supervision of the performance of APR and discusses the board's reasons for removing the range setting provision in the modified text based on the history of the range setting and direct supervision provisions in regulation. I would like to point out here that that APTC submitted another letter to the board 2 days ago on January 26, 2021. The January 26 APTC letter seeks clarification on 2 points in particular. The first point is APTC wants the board to provide the meeting dates, transcripts, and minutes that reflect the specific board decision, determining that APR is outside the scope of an auxiliary animal health care task because of the higher risk it presents for the animal patient. Pages 5 and 6 of my January 25, 2021 memo that you're seeing right now discusses why the board interprets APR to fall outside of the scope of auxiliary animal health care tasks. This discussion mirrors the board response approved in the October 22, 2020 memo, which is included in the meeting materials. That discussion in the October 2022 memo can be found on page 13, response to item 5. In addition, the October 22 memo cites to the California State Assembly Committee on Business and Professions analysis of Assembly Bill 3013 from 2018. Page 6 of that committee analysis is cited on pages 5 and 10 of the October 22 memo and states in pertinent part, quote, currently, a licensed PT who wants to perform physical therapy on an animal must pursue additional licensure as a veterinarian, pursue registration as RVT, or work under the direct supervision of a licensed veterinarian as a veterinary assistant, end quote. Thus, the board's interpretation that APR falls outside the scope of auxiliary healthcare tasks and requires direct veterinarian supervision is the same interpretation as the California State Assembly Committee's on statutory requirements applicable for a physical therapist to perform physical therapy on an animal. Therefore, this is not a notable contradiction, as APTC argues, that will force business not currently operating under the requirements of the Veterinary Medicine Practice Act. The board has already approved responses to APTC assertions that the proposed regulation would result in businesses closing. Those responses can be found in the October 22 memo on page 10, the January 25 memo that you're looking at right now on page 4 includes responses regarding increased consumer costs alleged by APTC. Next, discussed on page 8 of the memo, The APTC letter asserts that the modified text will not allow equine veterinarians to decide the level of supervision, direct or indirect, for a licensed physical therapist certified in animal rehabilitation or any other trusted and qualified non-veterinarian provider. APTC recommends the proposal allow the veterinarian to decide the level of supervision of a trusted person they choose to collaborate with to increase access to more providers. So more animals get the care they need and the public would be afforded more choice in the care of their animals. The proposed board response discusses how the Practice Act and supporting regulations require direct supervision over the performance of APR by an individual not licensed or registered by this board. The proposed response also discusses the need for direct veterinarian supervision in the event of a medical emergency and explains how the rulemaking proposal is consistent with statutory direct supervision requirements. Next, discussed on page 9 of the memo, APTC recommends the board consider a statutory amendment to allow for indirect veterinarian supervision through the use of telecommunication. First, it is important to note the recommendation generally requests indirect supervision through telecommunication. The recommendation does not specifically request telecommunications supervision over the practice of APR by veterinary assistants. As such, the proposed board response discusses the levels of veterinarian supervision required in statute and existing regulations and notes that indirect veterinarian supervision is not prohibited. The proposed response rejects the recommendation to pursue a statutory remedy to generally allow for indirect veterinarian supervision through the use of telecommunication. Next, at the bottom of page 9 of the memo, APTC recommends the board reconsider the regulatory proposal, abandon it, and pursue legislation similar to AB 3013. The proposed board response rejects the recommendation and discusses why the board does not propose scope of practice legislation. Next, page 10 of the memo discusses issues raised in the APTC letter that do not directly address the modified text and are therefore outside the scope of the rulemaking. Item 3 of the APTC letter requests changes to supervision requirements generally and seeks information about past incidents relating to VA supervision. The board response directs APTC to the board's minutes and meetings materials over the last 9 years as a sufficient record of the board's consideration of this regulation. Item 5 in the APTC letter inquires how the board believes the regulatory proposal increases consumer access to physical therapy services. The proposed board response compares the limitations and scope of practice for other healthcare providers, which is the same for physical therapists. Unless the healthcare providers are licensed by the Veterinary Medical Board, they must be supervised by a veterinarian to provide animal healthcare services. Loss by consumers of illegitimate services is not an interest the board should weigh or protect, and the issue of increasing a physical therapist's scope of practice to include services performed on animals is a matter to be determined by the legislature. If a legislative change occurs, the board would work with all interested parties to protect California consumers and their animals. Further down on page 10, the memo discusses item 7 in the APTC letter that asks the board if it understands that a direct supervision mandate that does not allow for reasonable exemptions for other qualified providers could be construed as monopolization and or antitrust. The proposed board response advises that it is a mischaracterization of existing law and ignores the board's consumer protection mandate. The board response refers APTC to the board's October 22 responses that fully discuss APTC's antitrust assertions and advises that the board looks forward to working with all interested parties to protect California consumers and their animals if there is a legislative change authorizing healthcare providers licensed by other boards to practice on animal patients. At the bottom of page 10, the memo discusses the APTC query whether the board supports the One Health initiative issued by the Center for Disease Control, and if so, how the board will address the fact that they are preventing non-veterinary qualified and licensed professionals to practice APR. The proposed board response notes that expanding the scope of practice for human healthcare professionals to practice on animals does not appear to be one of the goals of the One Health initiative. The rulemaking proposal operates within the statutory and regulatory limitations requiring veterinarian supervision over individuals not licensed by the Veterinary Medical Board. As stated previously, the board does not submit legislative proposals to expand the scope of veterinary practice or to expand the scope of practice of healthcare professionals licensed by other boards, and as such will not submit a legislative proposal to expand the ability of professionals licensed to treat human patients who seek also to treat animal patients. There are a few more points to address in the January 26, 2021 APTC letter. The second point for which they seek clarification relates to their allegation that the board has relied on misinformation to make decisions. APTC asserts Dr. Waterhouse misinformed other board members during discussion at prior board meetings. Since the proposed regulation does not pertain to the training of veterinary students, and regardless of this regulatory proposal, physical therapists who are trained in animal rehabilitation must either be licensed by the Veterinary Medical Board as a veterinarian or RVT to provide animal physical rehabilitation or be directly supervised by a licensed veterinarian. APTC again requests the board pursue a legislative remedy akin to AB 3013, which is addressed in item 4 of the responses you have before you. In addition, APTC alleges the board opposed AB 3013 based on misinformation. However, the board's May 23 through 24, 2018 meeting minutes on page 6 explained that the board opposed AB 3013 because it would have created a significant fiscal impact to the board and mandated the board provide accreditation services, inspections, and licensed physical rehabilitation premises with no veterinary supervision. The significant cost impact resulting from AB 3013 is provided on pages 2 through 3 of this memo. The January 26, 2021 APTC letter does not explain what part of the board's reasons for opposing AB 3013 were based on misinformation, but the board's reasons to oppose track the requirements made of the board that were included in AB 3013 itself. On page 11 of the memo, the board is asked to consider and approve proposed responses to written and oral comments received on the APR proposal for inclusion in the board's final statement of reasons. If the board agrees with the proposed responses to written and oral comments, please entertain a motion to approve the responses to written and oral comments for inclusion in the board's final statement of reasons in support of the APR rulemaking file. Please discuss.
Okay. I'm going to probably ask board members to make comments on this. But I would start off by saying that we've looked at this issue for a very long time. I do realize and acknowledge that it is not everything that the physical therapists want. But I also think that we have made, I'm proud of the task force that we put together, and I'm still proud of the recommendations that were made. But for various reasons, a lot of economic reasons, it just wasn't passed. But the issue wasn't dropped, and some things are beyond our controls as far as when things die in committee. But I think that this board does truly acknowledge the importance of physical therapy in the part of providing care to our animal patients, and it's created the ability of physical therapists to perform physical therapy on animals, whereas before it was not in the Physical Therapy Practice Act or our Practice Act. So it's not everything that everyone asked for, and there are very valid points that have been raised, and I think that Tara's done a good job at addressing the points of opposition, and I would be in favor of continuing it as written without any major changes. So I'm going to just go down the list and ask comments, and I think I'll try to go alphabetically. So I think Kathy Bowler is first.
Hi. Thank you, Tara. That was a very good presentation, and really appreciate the work you put into encapsulating kind of the many years of the discussion and all the various hearings and everything. I didn't find anything that I disagreed with on any of your proposed responses, and felt like everything you wrote was consistent with past board practice and actions and on the subject. And so really don't have anything to add. I felt like these were good responses that are consistent with what the board has done.
Okay. The next person alphabetically, I think, is Dr. Nolan. Oh no, Jennifer Laredo.
I'm not used to being so high up in the alphabet. This is nice. So I agree with Kathy. I think the responses are appropriate. I really feel on this issue and so many that the comment in there was that, there was some information that was misleading. I think it all just comes down to the wording. And there are so many times where we're arguing about things because the wording is confusing or we're just not sure what something means. Even with telemedicine, there's just not clarity on, things we're already allowed to do. So I don't think anything nefarious was going on. I don't think anybody was intentionally using misinformation. I think this is just really confusing. We're not all attorneys like Tara and Diana who can understand all of these things, but I'm fine with the response as is.
Dr. Nolan.
Thank you, and I apologize. I can hardly hear sometimes. I've got so much banging and whatnot. My son and my husband are trying to repair some flood damage stuff before tonight. So if I cut off and just quit talking, it's because the loud noises start again. Anyway, seems quiet right now. So I would agree with what everyone has said, and I do think that we might down the road have an occasion to actually work together with the physical therapists if legislation is passed. And I think we look forward to doing that, but I think at this point, this is the right route to go.
Ms. Prado?
Yeah, I don't have any comment to offer. Thank you.
Dr. Solicito?
I just wanted to say, being new to this, I appreciate how Tara had presented it in digestible pieces. So I don't have any other comments. Thank you.
Ms. Inez?
Yeah, I have no comments at this time.
If we're going to, we need a motion to accept the responses that Tara has presented.
I'll move it. It's Kathy.
I'll second it.
So to clarify, the motion is to approve the responses to written oral comments on the modified text for inclusion in the board's final statement of reasons in support of the AAPR rulemaking file.
And that would include all the responses, not those within that 15-day period. Any further comments from the board? If not, we will open it up to the public.
This is the moderator. I'm opening up the Q&A at the request of the board. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment, click on the Q&A icon located at the bottom right corner of your WebEx screen and type "I would like to make a comment" in the Ask field and send it to all panelists. I have individual identified as Karen Atlas that would like to make a comment. Karen, I will unmute you now.
Thank you very much. My name is Karen Atlas, and I am the president of the Animal Physical Therapy Coalition. And the coalition is comprised of all the stakeholders who are like-minded on this issue. So we're talking about the DVMs, PTs, consumers, and RVTs. Before I get started on my other comment, I just wanted to take a quick side note because I was really inspired by the presentation given by HSUS and the SFSPCA and Pets for Life, who outlined so clearly the profound access to care issue for all veterinary care, especially for those in the Black, Indigenous, and people of color community. And recognizing and tackling those as social injustice issues are so important in every aspect. I'm so grateful for the work done by Amanda, Dr. Valdez, and Brandy's been doing. I'd also like to remind this board that animal physical therapy and rehabilitation care by qualified PTs is also a key access issue. So I personally had the opportunity to serve on the CVMB's Animal Rehab Stakeholders Task Force with Dr. Nunez presiding. And on that task force, we studied this issue in great depth and detail, only for those recommendations relating to PTs practicing on animals to be rejected by this board. And yes, much of it was based off of misinformation. And if you want me to bullet point out all of the pieces of misinformation, I can, and I have all of those. So please let me know if you'd like me to do that. Our coalition has taken great strides to try to collaborate with the VMB to solve this issue that's plagued our state for well over a decade now. And we even had the Assembly Bill 3013 introduced in 2018, which passed the first policy committee with 0 no votes and was opposed at that time in that policy committee by the vet board and by the CVMA. So it wasn't just opposed at the appropriations committee, but it was also opposed before anything fiscally was even discussed. So, if you're going to try to work with the other stakeholders, I wasn't sure how that opposition was looking like, because all of the things that were in Bill AB 3013 were vetted by the VMB's own stakeholders task force. So unfortunately, it was held in appropriations, and it would have been the necessary step to adequately solve this issue. And the opposition, it suffered the misfortune of enduring the misinformation campaigns. Notably, the board council in the most recent memo suggested that the VMB does not take up issues to change statute. They only change and create regulations. But past legal counsel, Kurt Hepler, was very clear during the stakeholders task force that we were not to be limited by the framework of the Practice Act, and that if statutory change was going to be necessary to properly solve the issue, then we were told that the VMB can ask the legislature for help in order to do so. And since this issue is a specific item listed in the Sunset Review, and since it's been confirmed in that order to properly include qualified PTs to practice under reasonable guidelines, why isn't the VMB asking the legislature to help solve it since there's so much controversy? Thanks.
Dr. Nunez, no further actually, we do have one that just came in. Grant Miller, I will unmute your microphone.
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to comment in with the California Veterinary Medical Association's support of these proposed regulations. These have been in the works for a long time. They have reflected countless hours and meetings involving all stakeholders with public comments. And we would just really appreciate if the board could continue to move these along in the process. Obviously, there's always a possibility that a legislative process can occur simultaneous to regulations, but it feels like these regulations have just been held up for a long period of time. And regardless of what happens at the legislature, these regulations can serve a pretty good purpose now in helping us get a little bit closer to understanding the rules around animal physical rehabilitation. Thank you.
Next individual, GV Ayers. I'll unmute your microphone at this moment.
Thank you. This is GV Ayers, and I represent the Animal Physical Therapy Coalition. And as you've heard from Karen Atlas earlier, the Animal Physical Therapy Coalition remains opposed to the regulation. We believe that a better way of operating that protects consumers, that recognizes the skills of veterinary medical professionals, and also recognize the skills of qualified physical therapists to operate in this area. A better solution would be a legislative solution that would allow these professionals to work together in this in an appropriate fashion. So we want to make sure that we reiterate our opposition to the regulation and an invitation to work in a collaborative way with the Veterinary Medical Board on a legislative solution. Thank you.
Dr. Nunez, no further requests have been submitted. Would you like me to close the Q&A?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Any other comments from the board? Hearing none, Jessica, could you call for the vote?
Ms. Bowler?
Aye.
Ms. Laredo?
Yes.
Ms. Prado?
Yes.
Dr. Solacito?
Yes.
Ms. Yanis?
Yes.
Dr. Nolan?
Yes.
Dr. Nunez?
Abstain.
Motion carries.
Okay. Then let's move back up to agenda item number 9, discussion and possible action required waivers on telemedicine and refills.
Okay, so members, this is more about the discussion of extending the existing waivers. As you may recall, during the start of this pandemic, when the board had approved requesting these waivers, the board had requested that go through until December, and not knowing how long this would take. However, it's obviously still here, and the state of emergency is still in place, and don't know how much longer it will stay in place. But what we did with the executive committee, which was Dr. Noland and Kathy Bowler at the time, was in order to allow these to continue to give the board time to discuss, the executive committee did request that the director extend the waivers for another 60 days, which would allow the board time to discuss how long they would request that they extend. So at this point, it's up to the board what they would request from the director, how long you would like to extend these waivers, potentially at least until the end of the state of emergency. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you.
So again, the specific waivers, there are 2 of them. One of them involves telemedicine, and previously a veterinarian was able to prescribe, offer advice, diagnose on via telemedicine on only a pet that they've established for BCPR, and only on a condition that has been previously diagnosed. The waiver pretty much allowed for veterinarians to address concerns that have not been previously diagnosed via telemedicine. And the second waiver regard to prescription refills being extended for various reasons related to the pandemic from previously 12 months to 18 months. The dates that you have in your memo confuse me a little bit, but I don't think it's relevant to the overall request for us to extend the waivers through the end of the state of emergency or until the MDC has recommendations, whichever comes first. And the MDC recommendations that we're referring to is in response to the DCA's request for us to consider whether or not we want to make any of these waivers permanent. So, having summarized that, and I think it was correctly because I haven't heard anything from Jessica or Tara. Would anyone like to make a motion?
This is Kathy. Does it, again, I wanted to ask this question because I was going to move to extend it through the current, state of emergency order. But I remember we had discussion about that at the last one of the meetings, whether that was appropriate or to do it at a certain, through June or whatever. Mark, you may have said it and I missed it. If we just do it through the duration of the state of emergency until the governor rescinds that, is that appropriate? Jessica?
I mean, if you're asking me, I think it is.
Yeah, I'm asking. Yeah.
Yeah, that could be a motion that you make.
I don't think
I'd like to make that one.
She's asking about appropriateness of
Yeah, I was asking about the state of emergency. There was some discussion about the fluidity of that at our prior meeting, is what I recall, which is why we set a certain time, like the end of January, the end of the year, or whatever.
So implying that the governor's assessment of the end may not jive with our assessment of the need for these waivers.
Well, I could jump in and kind of clarify. We weren't sure if the state of emergency would carry on for years and years because of an economic problem. So that's what we were just kind of trying to, we had no idea at the time, and we were like, well, we don't know. So we were just trying to keep the decision more closer to home, I think.
That's right. It was based on federal money for the state of emergency. That was the discussion. Okay. Well, I'll back my motion and let other people discuss to see if we want to do a different time certain. I don't know.
I mean, to that point, if the MDC makes a decision before the governor ends the state of emergency, and they decide that these waivers should not be made permanent, they're still in place until the DCA director removes them, or do we have the authority to opt out of what the DCA has made so? So the waivers do have an expiration date, and so if the board did not want to extend it, you would request the DCA director not extend it. That doesn't mean that she's required to not extend it. They might decide that they want to continue it, but we can make the request that they do not, if that's the goal of the board. So by giving the option of us making a decision based on the MDC recommendations would address Dr. Nolan and Ms. Bowler's concerns, I think. So we still have a motion and a second, I think. And any other concerns from the board?
I'm sorry, I didn't realize there was a motion and a second. Can you tell me who made that motion and second?
I think Kathy did. And I think Dr.
Yeah, I made the original motion to extend through the current state of emergency order.
Or until a decision has been made by the NBC, whichever comes first.
MDC or DCA?
At the bottom of the action requested, it says approving a motion to request the DCA director issues the extension until the end of the state of emergency or until the NBC provides final recommendations, whichever comes first.
So Kathy, is that the motion that you would like to make, or do you just want it through the state of emergency?
No, I forgot about the MDC looking at these issues as well, so that makes probably more appropriate to leave it the way it's worded here. So I apologize for not getting to that, the action requested.
Okay, and who seconded the motion?
I think Dr. Nolan did.
No, I didn't.
Well,
I didn't. I thought the motion that I was recommending was just to go to the end of the emergency, so I was confused.
All right. So I'll second the motion then. It's the motion and seconded. Are there any other comments from the board?
I have a question, I guess. So if we pass this vote and the MDC does decide not to renew it, does that mean that it just ends without any discussion? Because again, we don't know how long the state of emergency is going to last. And for example, the stay-at-home order was just lifted, but that doesn't mean that it's safe to go party again. So I'm just concerned that this will end without us taking any action. So you just clarify that for me.
Well, if the MDC determines that these waivers should not be made permanent, then once the governor declares the end of the state of emergency, the waiver will go away.
Well, doesn't the MDC decision have to come back to the board anyway?
Yes, and so the MDC has made their recommendations yesterday, and so those will be presented to the board in April. And so the board at that time can discuss this further, whether or not you want to accept the MDC's recommendations, and then potentially discuss about the waivers at that time as well.
I think the waivers are important to address the challenges that come before us during this pandemic. So in the broad scheme of things, I really think that we should keep them while we're in this pandemic, but I don't think that they should be made permanent. And the motion that has been made, I think appropriately allows us to do that. So if there's no more comments from the board, then we can open it up to the public for comments.
This is the moderator. I've opened up the Q&A at the request of the board. Members of the public? If you would like to make a comment, click on the Q&A icon at the bottom right corner of your screen and type "I would like to make a comment" and send it to all panelists. Dr. Nunez, no requests have been submitted. Would you like me to close the Q&A?
Yes.
Oh, actually, my apologies. We have one from GK. GK, I'm going to unmute your microphone at this moment.
Hey, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, just curious if this waiver is, if I'm thinking, should be regarding continuing education classes also. So I'm sure I would tie into the agenda number 8 that discuss the using of continuing education classes, if they're endorsing from another state, how would that be tying into it? And also, I just want, on a side note, answer a question for Jamie. Dr. Jamie, we had a question on India. I'm from India. I just want to let you know, we do not have any continuing education requirements in India, nor do we have a requirement of any license. In India, you just graduate and you register with the council and you start working. And we are very out of date of what is happening in other countries. We are way back in practical knowledge from what is done in US. So I just want you all to be aware of that if you are going to just use continuing education classes as a requirement, because you need to look at training. Because in India, we just go by what the British thought before they left India, and we are just following it. And for a population of 1.36 billion, we only have 70,000 veterinarians in India, which tells you the huge gap we have between practical knowledge and theory. So I just want to put that out for Jamie, so that we do not have any continuing education requirements. Thank you.
You know, I would like to say, as board president, welcome to our meeting with GK. We're glad you're here. That was great. And what are the chances of an Indian veterinarian calling in based on our previous discussion? That's fantastic. But I don't think that.
And I would like to say thank you for the clarification. And I take it you didn't then take offense when we were criticizing continuing education in India. I'm happy to hear that as well.
But I don't think these waivers apply to continuing education. I think GK is referring to other licensing requirements. Your concerns, GK, I don't think are affected by these waivers.
Dr. Nunez, I had muted GK. Did you want me to unmute him again?
Yes.
Okay. GK, you're unmuted.
Oh yeah, so my question was, if they're endorsing in from another state, and let's say something like this is happening at that time, and the other state has waived their continuing education requirements, I'm talking for the future, okay? What would happen with us if they're coming into California and we have this requirement as a waiver, and they say, hey, I couldn't do it due to my state has waived it. So how would we tie this in? How would we factor it in at that time?
Yeah, I think you probably should have called in when we were talking about licensing requirements after the elimination of the state board. These particular waivers are not involved. CE is not involved.
Okay. I'm sorry, I didn't.
Yeah, and to address your concerns, would have us go back on the agenda, which is complicated.
Perfect. Thank you.
Any other comments?
No further requests have been submitted. Would you like me to close the Q&A?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
And are there any other comments from the board? If you want to choose another country to dig at, Dr. Nolan? If not, then we can call for the vote.
Ms. Fuller.
Aye.
Ms. Laredo?
Yes.
Ms. Prado?
Yes.
Dr. Solicito?
Yes.
Ms. Yanes?
Yes.
Dr. Noland?
Yes.
Dr. Nunez?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay. Again, I do believe that our board members make wiser decisions before 5 o'clock. So that gives us about 20 minutes, 25 minutes left. Do you think that we can get status of pending regulations done in 25 minutes? And that,
I think we can, but I'll turn over to Karen Halbo and Justin Sotelo. They're the ones presenting on the pending regulations.
I would ask them the question if they think they could get it done in 25 minutes.
Yeah, I think we'll give it a shot. We'll do the best we can here.
Then go to it.
Justin, would you mind sharing your screen so you can present, or Karen, either one?
Sure, I don't mind.
It needs to be Justin. He's a little more high tech than I am.
I can do that.
Justin, do you want to go over the summarizing memo? Or do you want me to?
It doesn't matter. I think we had you up for doing it, but I'm willing to go along with you and chime in as necessary.
Okay. Well, the memo before the board summarizes the different rulemaking packages and notes that the AB 2038, the criminal conviction, substantial relationship, and rehabilitation criteria regulations became effective on November 19th of 2020. So that will drop off our update after this. The RVT emergency animal care package has been submitted to OAL. That was done December 23rd of 2020. And I just need to let the board know that Justin Sotelo really pushed in November and December so that we could get these things in by the end of the year. And I just really appreciate his efforts. The RVT job tasks package is also at OAL being reviewed. That was submitted on December 24th of 2020. And the veterinarian client-patient relationship, the VCPR regulation, went into OAL on December 30th, 2020. OAL has, under governor's orders, extensions of their time to review regulation packages. I guess they've been impacted pretty severely by the state of emergency and all of the regulation packages they review. And unlike previous years when I would hear within a week of turning in a package, who was the reviewer, and start working with them within a week or two, I have had other packages that I have not heard anything for over a month. So things are just different right now during this time. And now that it's there, they will review it, but it won't be as fast because they have their usual 30 days to review plus extensions of 120 more days. And there's lots of emergency regs right now. On the fee schedule, let's see. We have the comment period closed on November 9th. There was the hearing on the 10th. Justin, I didn't think we had any comments on this. Is that right for the cert?
No, we did have comments, and it's coming up. I'll be presenting that agenda item here soon.
Okay, that's one of the memos. Okay.
Yes.
And let's see. For the readoption of the emergency filing, that was simply taken care of so that the board could continue to enforce the fees that were granted in the initial emergency filing. So that's just keeping the lights on, and it's already effective and will continue. For animal physical rehabilitation, okay, that's going to be item C. For drug compounding, that's going to be item E. These are when you've already voted on C. For duties to the supervising veterinarian, I believe the board, it was mentioned that the MDC had recommended withdrawal of the rulemaking. So on that item, that's not called out as a separate item, but if the board has not voted on the MDC's recommendation to withdraw the rulemaking, it would be appropriate to make that motion at the end of this report. So let me keep going and then I'll circle back to that.
Just to clarify, the board did, sorry, Karen, just to clarify, the board did make that motion and approved withdrawing that regulation. Yes.
Okay, so then that one can drop off. I'm trying to take notes on what I want to drop off for next time. Okay. And then for disciplinary guidelines, there's a memo for that. It'll be covered in item B. And the eligibility evaluation for the National Veterinarian Exam, that has been approved by the board and staff is putting together the package. So that's where everything is, and you're right, you don't need a vote on that if that was voted in the previous meeting. I lost track of that and thought it had not been done. So that can then be removed from this. And then Justin, I'll turn it over for you for the individual items that you have more detailed memos prepared for the board.
Okay, and I believe, Jessica, were you presenting agenda item 11B?
Yes, I can do that.
Okay.
Do we want to go into 11B and D and E, or do you want to call it a day here?
That's up to the board. I'm happy to do either one.
It is 4:40, and I think this is probably a good place to stop. Unless I have any objections from the board. But I would like to say thank you to everyone. I think that the pandemic has been very challenging, and the board staff has met that challenge and have done remarkable work in getting business done. So thank you very much. And the other request I have is, in the future, when you're giving us a status update, some of these regulations we voted on years ago. So sometimes the title of the regulation doesn't always click in my mind what you're talking about. So if I'd like to request that you just add a little bit of detail as far as which regulation that was. Like emergency animal care. What was that? Was that the rodeo thing, or was that shelter thing? So just a little quick summary would be helpful.
Yes, sir. Yes, we can definitely do that, Dr. Nunez.
Okay, so then just for the record, we're proposing that 11B, D, and E be tabled until tomorrow. So that's just so the public can know what to expect.
And tomorrow we have, we're going to reconvene at 9. We have a deadline of 1 o'clock. I think that's when we have to go into a closed session. Is that correct, 1 o'clock?
That's when we start the petition hearings, and then after that you go into closed session.
Okay, so I think things will go quickly, but I would ask the board members to make sure that they read all the executive management reports. If there is going to be a time constraint, I would probably ask for the staff members not to give a specific report, but just be made available for questions if we need to do that. Okay? All right. So I don't think we need a motion. Do I just by executive order saying that we are recessed until tomorrow?
Yes, we just need to start our recess.
All right. Then we are in recess. Thank you, everyone.
Hi, everybody.
See you tomorrow.